Welcome, everyone, to the 8th meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact pec@london.ca. Before I move on, I'd like to welcome all committee members. The mayor will not be attending this meeting, but I want to welcome Deputy Mayor Morgan to our meeting. Moving on to the agenda, disclosures of pecuniary interest. I see none. So moving on to the consent items, we have a number of consent items, a report from TFAC, a number of holding provisions, as well as a one-year extension, and the Parking Standards Review Information Report and Bill 13 Information Report to be received and for circulation. Any items to be pulled by committee members? I see none. So I am looking for a mover to approve the consent items. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Any comments? Councillor Lehman. Oh, sorry. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, this question for our staff is actually going to relate to two items on the agenda, and just the nature of how the agenda came together for this meeting, they're kind of interwoven. So through you, we have in 2.2 the Bill 13 Information Report, which is helpful in knowing where the province seems to be taking us on things, and 2.3, the Parking Standards Review Information Report. And I noted in the reports around Bill 13 that there were some recommendations about some delegated authorities, one of which might delegate temporary use renewals to staff. And then when it comes to the Parking Standards Review, obviously we've had a number of surface parking lots that have had extensions to their temporary use over time. One of the things that stands out for me, though, in comments to the Parking Standards Review is that surface parking lots where they're occurring, the encouragement from some folks in the community about having rain gardens or other green spaces breaking up so that we don't have just one flat monotonous block of asphalt. So with the potential, whether for council or if authority is delegated later to staff, when temporary uses come up, has any thought been given in the Parking Standards Review to requiring new standards to be implemented on sites in order for temporary use to continue? For example, like the rain garden opportunities or landscaping features around parking lots, so that as we move potentially to not having minimum parking standards anymore, that we're also looking at how parking is a little more integrated into the environment and the character of the neighborhood, and a little less, that monoculture asphalt block.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis, and I can understand why that relates to 2.2 as well, because it's that delegation authority as well to allow for how we proceed. I wonder if I can go to staff for their comments.
Through the chair, this is Justin Adama. With regards to the parking study, really what we're looking at right now is the table in the zoning bylaw that assigns the minimum requirements to a variety of permitted uses and establishes what those minimum requirements would be. This is also part of the broader rethink zoning process that we've initiated, which looks at the zoning bylaw from a much more comprehensive perspective, and is actually the process through which we'll develop an entirely new bylaw to implement the London plan. So part of that process is looking at how we implement a lot of the London plan objectives around use, intensity, and form, and balancing that in our approach to zoning. Currently, the zoning bylaw is very much focused on land use, with consideration of intensity, but not a lot of regard for how to implement or achieve the built form that the London plan directs in its policies. So it is a good question and something that's very much on our radar. I think it's probably more a part of that broader discussion when we get into those specific design elements. So at this stage for this review, the focus is on the numbers, sort of the numerical minimum parking requirement based on the permitted use, but that broader discussion around form will be considered, but I think requires a bit more work and will be part of the broader rethink zoning review.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate that update from our staff, and I would say that it's a great opportunity, I think, for us to look at how, because parking will continue to be required, but how it's integrated a little better into the fabric and feel of a neighborhood. So I'm glad that that's going to be part of the rethink zoning process. I will say that when it comes to the parking standards, I'm very, very hopeful that we may be moving to some sort of hybrid or open parking standards rather than parking minimums. I know that I see in many areas large parking lots that, aside from perhaps around Christmas, sit unused and are at significantly less than sometimes even 50% capacity, and that's space that really, to me, doesn't make the best use of our land. So I'm encouraged with the information that was in the parking standards review. I'm looking forward to the public feedback on that. But I will say, after my preliminary read, I'm very supportive of moving towards an open parking standard.
I'd like to go to committee members first before I go to Councillor Van Holst. I see his hand up. Any other comments from committee members? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to be at your committee. Thanks for the work to staff. I see there's some nice infill happening in the consent agenda. I'm quite pleased with the Bill 13 information report. Allows us to move the holding symbols. And I see there's a couple of those in here now in the consent agenda. So obviously that those kinds of things could happen quicker. I wanted to ask about the minor zone changes that were allowed. What kinds of things could happen in terms of a minor zone change? And I also wanted to refer to the committee of adjustment and ask if there's any parts of what they do that could be sped up through this delegation process.
Councillor Van Holst, you have two questions there. Can I go with the first one about questions around minor zone changes first?
Sure. So, what kinds of minor zone changing could we have if they're not just dealing with the temporary permissions and the holding provisions?
Staff?
For the chair, it's Justin Adama again. So in the report, we included an appendix that identifies draft policies, which are for circulation and will be brought back to a future meeting. But in those draft policies, we identified 4 types of minor zoning bylaw amendment where this delegated approval authority could apply. So that includes the removal of a holding symbol where the provision has been met, the renewal of an existing temporary use provision, except where that temporary use includes a surface commercial parking lot in the downtown place type, The third is the correcting of minor errors and omissions. And fourth is housekeeping updates to reflect changes to job titles, city departments, external agencies and organizations, or other policy documents and legislation. With regard to minor variances, that would be, that minor variance process would remain. So this doesn't impact what would go through the minor variance process. That would still go to the Committee of Adjustment and require public notice and a public meeting. It would just be these specifically defined types of minor zoning bylaw amendments that could be delegated to staff as the approval authority.
Okay, thank you. That's a fine response, and makes a lot of sense. I was just concerned that there might be something else we missed, or that I wasn't understanding there that was possible. That's great. I'm also happy, like Councillor Lewis, to see that we might be moving towards some open, an open system for the parking. What I wanted to ask was, if something comes forward and we're not happy with the amount of parking, what would the process be like there? It's only happened very rarely, but I do remember occasion or two where I've looked at the amount of parking and thought it's not reasonable for the application. So what might happen in those instances, and how would council respond?
Through the chair again. So it's Justin Adam again. So the draft parking policies that are being presented here, again for circulation, include minimum requirements. So if a proposal came in below the new minimum requirements, if that's the final recommendation, there would still be either a zoning bylaw amendment or minor variance required. If the concern would be that there's not enough parking provided, but they are above the minimum requirement, or there is no minimum requirement in that area, then it would not be a zoning issue, possibly something to discuss through another process with the applicant, but there would not be a zoning requirement to enforce to ensure any certain number of parking spaces are provided.
Okay, so perhaps you could describe how we might resolve, let's say, an instance where it seemed like more parking was appropriate or needed. How would we negotiate that with the developer?
So part of this amendment puts the onus on the developer to determine if there's an open option that's decided upon. It would be on the developer or the business owner to determine what level of parking is required and to implement that. Because there wouldn't be a zoning requirement, it wouldn't be part of our commenting on the amount of parking, as long as they complied with the bylaw.
Councillor Van Hulst.
Right. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I guess we have to rely very heavily on the applicants in that case. Is there? I wondered if there was room for comment. So anyway, there seems like a little red flag there for me, but I'll turn the mic back to you in the committee. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Van Hulst, for your comments. I'd like to go to Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Adama. A few comments. First, with respect to the parking standards. I'm not sure if this delves into site plan stuff or if it's opportunities here. First, when we take a look at some of those other municipalities, Toronto, Calgary, and Edmonton, who have basically moved to remove a lot of those parking standards, we're moving to a hybrid option, or it's one of the options in front of us. Is there an opportunity here to look for parking maximums? rather than talking about minimums. I think the move towards reducing those minimums is quite appropriate. But if we're doing this in the vein of climate emergency response and in terms of arable land and how we use it best, parking maximums might be an opportunity for us here as well.
Mr. Adama?
Through the chair, so parking maximums are certainly one of the options that we've looked at and has been on the table. So we presented a background information report in the fall, I believe it was in November. And that was one of the options that had been discussed. And one of the comments we heard at that time was that we needed to be very cautious around potential impacts on local business. And through our analysis, one of the findings has been that there's more potential for business impacts when we start talking about parking maximums. And so in order to go down that road, we wanted to have a very comprehensive set of data to work with, considering the local context and all that. And with that understanding, what we found was that given what the past 2 years have looked like with COVID and the impacts of that on travel patterns and behaviors, we didn't feel that collecting data at this time would be necessarily applicable in the not too distant future. So it is still something we have available, specifically in key areas such as, around the planned rapid transit network. But we felt that at this time, we didn't want to bring that forward until we were able to collect that more robust data set in order to inform the recommendations. So in the future, when we develop the Rethink Zoning bylaw, it may be something that we consider, but at this time, and for the amendments that we're considering to the current zoning bylaw, we decided not to pursue that.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you. I can appreciate the rationale. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with it. I think as it stands right now, we have minimum parking requirements, and people can get leave to those parking requirements by showing us an argument that states that, in these circumstances, it might make sense to forego those minimums and go lower than that. And I would say that argument should apply the other way, that people should have to make an argument to put forward to state that they need more parking than what the maximum would indicate. And they could do that. But I think it would make sense that one of the things that we would look for is what are the steps that those property owners have taken in order to address some of those challenges that might evolve in terms of getting people to their locations outside of single occupant vehicles. So have they done their best to make their location pedestrian friendly, cycling friendly, transit friendly, and have they exhausted all of those options and they still need more parking, in which case council or staff could consider making recommendations to expand the maximum beyond the maximum that would sit there. Is that something that was part of the conversation? Because I think given the lens of everything that we're trying to accomplish, I think the onus needs to be on the business owners to show us why they need more.
Is that a comment, Councillor Turner?
No, that was a question. Was that part of the discussion? And is that something that could be feasible? Through you to Mr. Adams.
Through the chair, it was something we considered earlier on, but again, our finding was that and taking into account some of those preliminary comments was to not move forward with that at this time. Certainly, we're happy to incorporate that again and consider that for the final version.
Yeah, thank you. I think that will be really important. At this point, we're looking to circulate these things. It was something I would like to see some very purposeful comment on when the standards come back for approval and for our consideration as well. The second two, I think, might have something to do with site plan, but maybe there's an opportunity here as well. The first is with respect to EV charging as a proportion of the number of spots allocated. there would be an opportunity to say that a certain percentage of spots within a development would need to be well, first we have accessible parking. Could we also do the same and create that standard for EV charging stations as well? And the third would be parking shade requirements in terms of being able to, instead of just have mass sprawling surface parking lots, have a requirement to have a certain proportion of those lots shaded, either through shade trees or otherwise.
Again, Mr. Adama, any comments?
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor, for those suggestions, and we'll incorporate that into the next phase of our review.
Thank you, Councillor Turner.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, these are great opportunities. If we've declared the climate emergency and we've got the climate emergency toolkit and we've got a lens through which we're doing this, this is a great opportunity to do that. Beyond just talking about parking minimums, there are so many things that we can do from parking, and I think we need to be able to approach it from all angles. So I appreciate the consideration. And then the second, if I might, Madam Chair, just switch lanes to the Bill 13 questions. I'm curious about specifically with temporary use. We've had a number of these temporary uses that just seem to no longer be temporary use, just renewals in perpetuum. What criteria and lens will staff considering looking at for that delegated authority to determine whether it actually is in fact a temporary use or whether that temporary use is ended?
Yeah, thank you for that question. If I can go to staff for their comments around the temporary use, what constitutes temporary use and how we look at the criteria and uses.
Through the chair, so the proposed amendment doesn't incorporate any new criteria at this point, but it would still be subject to the policies of the London Plan, which are in force and provide direction for the review of temporary use extension.
And that's saying that I have an outstanding balance.
I think there's some mic
I
on.
paid the full.
Just one moment, Mr. Adama. Okay, I think we're good to go.
Thank you. Currently, when these come forward to council, council considers them and in some circumstances extends them, in some circumstances doesn't. Sometimes they're in line with the recommendations, sometimes they're not from staff. So I think this one's a little bit more of a tricky one. Rather, the delegation of lifting of holding provisions and things like that, I think those make sense. I see there being some political interest, certainly, in the temporary provisions. So that one I'm a little more reticent to delegate. Again, this is a document for circulation and consideration, I believe. So I'll save my comments until later. But I think if this is being circulated for comment, again, when the report comes back, I would like to see some consideration from staff as to what criteria they would consider for the extension or removal of temporary provisions.
Thank you. Councillor Van Hulst, do you have a comment or a question? I'm going back to you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and my gratitude for Councillor Turner, looking to see that the parking policy is very robust. My question is about too much parking. I have seen instances where obviously there turned out to be not enough parking. How often does it happen that we think they end up with too much parking?
So that is a question on what determines who determines too much parking?
I guess it's kind of an anecdotal thing where we look at various developments and decide, hey, here's an example where too much was parking. Obviously, parking, there's a cost to parking, and so that also creates a maximum. And so there's some other maximums that happen automatically, but I'm wondering, if it seems it's a common thing that too much parking may happen on a development.
The question is if there's too much parking available in the city?
Is it common to see a development that resulted in too much parking?
Thank you. If I can go to staff?
Through the
Madam-
chair, sorry. Go ahead, Mr. DeCuster.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I would like to answer that question in two ways. One is to look at the minor variances that the City of London receives. And generally, I don't have the exact numbers, but generally those apply to parking reductions, not increases of parking. So there are quite a lot of minor variances that look to decrease the amount of parking below the minimum required on-site parking. And secondly, and I fully admit that this is not a representative survey, but there was the opportunity for the public to comment and to fill in a survey on the Get Involved website. And when asked, I often see empty or mostly empty parking lots around London. 37% of the respondents, which were approximately 300 people, agreed. Another 21% somewhat agreed, and only 18% somewhat disagreed or strongly disagreed. So again, I'm well aware that that is not representative for the whole city, but that is an example of that the people who were interested in this parking standards review project generally leaned, I would say, 3-1, that they often see a lot of empty spaces. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yep.
yes, I'm very grateful our staff were able to quickly come up with some data to provide an answer for my questions. So thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to go to Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. Just on the parking report, glad to see it going out to be circulated. I think under the indicators for success, as mentioned in the report earlier on, parking requirements can increase the cost of housing substantially, especially infill housing that's designed to be a bit more affordable. And I think that's one of the indicators of success we really need to include, is something about affordability and how requiring less in the way of parking is going to reduce the overall cost of constructing new housing, especially in infill projects. So, I know this is just going out for comments, but I want to raise that now because it's mentioned in the report how it can really significantly increase, like 12%, 25%, depending on how much parking is required, the cost of urban infill housing. And I think that's one of the key things that is reducing the parking requirement, is not just a win for mobility and environmental reasons, but also for overall affordability of new housing.
Thank you, Councillor Helmer, for those comments. Are there any other comments from committee? I see none. If the committee will allow me just to make a brief comment on the consent items, in particular the parking standards. I really appreciate the questions and comments coming out. I think it's important that as a committee we provide comments to staff as we send this out for circulation. I do have just a follow-up question on, it's sort of related to a number of questions that were already asked, but really as we look at standards, we have two options that are available to us. Ultimately, is the final decision with council still as to how many parking spaces we allow through the application process. Just want to get verification on that.
Through the chair, so council would set the requirement in the zoning bylaw and has the ability to maintain or amend those requirements. And so as long as it's within that framework, council has the ability to make that decision. If the amendment that we're discussing today were to move to an open option, it would put that onus on the developer or business owner or property owner to determine how much parking is required.
Thank you for that clarification, and I look forward to the report coming back to committee here. I just would like to also add, it's good to see the bicycle parking requirements going up from 7 to 10. I know you looked at other cities. It will be interesting to see as we firm up those numbers, how in line we are with other cities, but it's good to see that increase as we look through that climate change lens, and also the affordable housing lens as well. Really important reports going out for circulation. Thank you, committee members, for your comments, and with that, we can go and vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
We're on to scheduled items. Our first one is 3.1, a public participation, a meeting for 520 Sarnia Road. Looking to open up the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hillier.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
That, and I would like to let committee members know there is a revised staff report and recommendation, as well as a bylaw. And with that, I would like to go to staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to note about the amended bylaw, there was just a couple of technical changes with regards to the height. It remains at 8 stories. It was just a technical issue with 27 to 29 within the zoning bylaw itself. And then I've highlighted the other portion, which is in the bonus zone with regards to the front yard setback of 0.5, which was also circulated through the public notification. So it's just a technical error. Moving forward, I'm going to cut this presentation down because I know we're already running behind and I don't see a lot of the members of the public here, so I'm going to cut it down. So to begin, first of all, thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to provide this presentation. It's Alana Riley, Senior Planner in Current Planning. Looking at slide 1, first of all, you can find this presentation in the added agenda. Slide 1, this is for an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment application pertaining to the subject property located at 520 Sarnia Road. We move to slide 2. The subject site is comprised of one irregular shaped lot, which is located on the south side of Sarnia Road at the southeast corner intersection of Sarnia Road and Chapman Court. Currently, the site contains a 1-story multi-tenanted commercial building, has a frontage of 148 meters along Sarnia Road, and an area of approximately 0.77 hectares. Surrounding uses consist of single detached across Sarnia to the north. We have some commercial across Sarnia as well. To the east, there's townhouses, along with townhouses to the south, an apartment building, and to the west, we have more commercial. The requested amendments, slide 3, looking at the proposed development. The requested amendments are to facilitate the development of an 8-story apartment building with a total of 129 residential units with a density of 168 units per hectare without a commercial component on the ground floor. The applicant also was seeking a bonus zone to implement the proposed development with special provisions that would identify Sarnia Road frontage as the front lot line, a reduced interior side yard setback of 7.5, reduced parking rate of 0.78 spaces, whereas one is required. We're also looking through the bonus zoning to permit the 8 stories, the 29 meters in height, and 168 units per hectare. The implementation of the bonus zone is in exchange for facilities, services, and matters provided by the applicant, including exceptional building design and affordable housing. Looking at the affordable housing component, it would include 2 bachelor units with rents not exceeding 80% of the average market rent for a 50-year time period. Also within the zoning bylaw, you'll notice that there is a base special provision for the R9 zone in case the applicant does not wish to proceed with the bonus zoning. And that's to allow the apartment building use and a reduced minimum front yard of 1 and height of 4 stories. So looking further, I want to note that there also are requested amendments to the London Plan and the 1989 official plan. For the London Plan, we're looking at a specific area policy to permit the building height of 8 stories. And to align with this policy context with the 1989 official plan policies, we're looking at a special policy to allow the proposed apartment building within the community commercial node without commercial on the ground floor, and also noting that it's 8 stories with a density of 168 units per hectare. Moving on to slide 4, this just shows the proposed developments further, and it shows the proposed 8-story, 129 unit apartment building. It also, I wanted to make note, there are 100 surface parking spaces, proposed. Moving on to slide 5, this is where I'm going to cut things down as the policy context. It is within a neighborhood's place type along Civic Boulevard. Apartment buildings with bonusing up to 6 stories are allowed under the London Plan. Making note, very important to note, that there are no height and density permissions for the community commercial node. However, for residential, we refer to the multifamily high, and where this typically allows 150 units per hectare outside of central London. And as discussed, the applicant has applied to increase the density through the bonusing provisions as discussed earlier. So I'm just moving on to slide 6, neighborhood concerns. We did receive some neighborhood concerns. I do want to make note that the applicant did host a community information meeting, which I think was a great success to help the public understand and discuss all of their concerns. There is a recommendation for site plan to consider a lot of these concerns through the review. I do want to just briefly touch note on the parking reduction. They have included in the application, as mentioned, to reduce the parking. And planning staff are of the opinion that the reduced parking rate is a common and acceptable modern standard for sites on these types of streets, which is Sarnia Road is a Civic Boulevard, quite a busy street, 4 lanes. And so therefore we are recommending a reduction. We also want to note that the development is also, along with being located along a higher order road, there's a lot of transit opportunity in the area, and there's a lot of transit stops. I just wanted to make mention of that. So therefore, slide 7, the recommendation as such, after the review, the recommended amendments are consistent with the provincial policy statement. They conform to the enforced policies of the London Plan, including but not limited to key directions in the neighborhood's place type. And further, the recommended amendment is in conformity with the enforced policies of the 89 plan, not limited to the multifamily high density. These amendments will facilitate the development of an underutilized site within the built area boundary and the primary transit area, with a land use intensity informed that are appropriate for the site through the use of bonus zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Riley. Any technical questions? Councillor Hillier.
Yes, did I hear correctly? There will not be a commercial component on the ground floor of this, but they're asking for the additional stories that would normally be accompanied with that?
Through you, Madam Chair. So in the 1989 official plan, it's in a community commercial node, and that designation requires commercial on the ground floor if it's with a mixed use building or regardless. And they applied to remove this commercial component through a site specific policy. And within the London plan, this is not required. You can have apartment buildings as of right. So I just want to make note, this is in the 1989 official plan. That's why they're requesting this special policy to construct or develop an apartment building without commercial on the ground floor.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification as well. Moving on to the applicant.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. It's Matt Campbell with Zelenka Priamo here. Can you hear me correctly?
Yes, I can. Mr. Campbell, please proceed. You have up to 5 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We're very excited to bring this application before committee today. This has been in the order of 3 years in the making. There's been a lot of planning that has gone into this site. And as Ms. Riley mentioned, this is an older commercial site that has really outlived its life. It's not a viable commercial site anymore. So we have a client that has a proven track record of developing in London. And for an example of the types of buildings that this particular developer builds, you can go just up Wonderland Road to just behind the Sherwood Forest Mall. And a recent development there, dubbed the W, is one of their developments, and that's currently occupied right now. So what we're proposing here, as Ms. Riley mentioned, is an 8-story apartment building. We do need the policy changes that we're requesting in the London plan. And we believe that this site and this particular development is sufficiently unique to consider a special policy, recognizing that the London plan is coming into effect more and more every day. And the policy that we're looking here is really intended to execute a great development that's going to fit into this community and really be a great asset, not only just for the city, for the broader commercial community to the south, the residential area, as well as the city as a whole. We're very excited to bring this forward. I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. And we did note that we did put together that neighborhood meeting that was February 9th. There was a good response for that, and we're also open to answering any questions that the public may have at this time. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank staff. I know that City of London staff are under tremendous workload right now, and we do appreciate them giving this application their full attention. And we've been working well with staff throughout the application process. So again, happy to answer any questions that the committee may have, and we do have a representative from the ownership group that may be able to assist with any questions as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I'd like to move on now to the public. If there's anyone here from the public that would like to speak to this application.
Hi, I have a question. My name is Dmitry Radakovich. I'm one of the owners in a neighboring building.
Yes, Mr. Radikovic, if you, I just want to welcome you to the Planning and Environment Committee meeting. You have up to 5 minutes. You can state your address if you wish. We do have your name, and please proceed.
Sure, thank you. I will be very brief, and thanks for opportunity to speak here. As I mentioned, I'm the owner at 30 Chapman, which is a neighboring building to this proposed development. I'm not, I don't live at the site, my tenant does. And I was not aware of this neighborhood meeting that happened on February 9th. I have pulled another couple of owners and a couple of tenants that are that I'm aware of, and they also were not aware of this neighborhood meeting that happened on February 9th. So I would like to inquire about a little bit more information about it, and if there were any meeting minutes documented, as you know, due to this concern that I have that not everybody was involved, and I'm not sure what was all shared and committed to at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Radikovic. We will answer that question once we finish the public participation meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just moving on, if there's anyone else that would like to speak to this application, please come forward. And I'll ask one more time, if there's anyone that would like to speak to this application, please come forward. I see and hear none. Now I'd like to go to committee members to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Lewis. If we can proceed to vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Before I proceed to the committee members, I would like to go to staff to see if they can respond to the notices that were sent out, how and when, regarding the open house public meeting, and any comments from that meeting. I wonder if I can go to staff first for the notices, the process of sending notices.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. So this was a developer-led meeting. These community meetings are often created by the developer. They do reach out to staff to get the labels for the surrounding area. So we create occupant labels. That's probably why Dimitri wasn't sent a notice, is because because they were occupant labels. And that's basically the process from our end, is we just assist the developers with the labels. I don't know if Matt wants to expand further on what he sent out and how they were sent out, were they emails, and if he has any copies of the minutes as well, because I think that's Dimitri was asking for those. Hopefully that helps somewhat.
Thank you, Ms. Riley. I would like to go to Mr. Campbell, if you could just comment on the process that you undertook on sending out notices, as well as commenting on the open house.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks very much, Madam Chair. And thanks, Dimitri, for the question. So what we typically do in these open house situations is we request the same notification radius that an application would be subject to. In this case, it's a 120-meter radius around the subject lands. And so city staff use their GIS systems to put together a map that shows that radius and capture any properties in that area. City staff then generate a spreadsheet of mailing labels for us. And in this particular instance, I believe we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 occupant addresses. So we sent out plus or minus 500 notices of this open house to area residents. We did receive a fairly good response. There were somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 20 responses, which, given that mail out, that's reasonably high. So we had the meeting over Zoom on February 9th. The minutes were not taken. However, notes were certainly taken during the meeting, and we use those internally to gauge whether any modifications to the development are warranted and assist in any particular changes that are needed. And for instance, occasionally with these types of neighborhood open houses, there are issues that are brought to our attention that we didn't know about. So they're certainly beneficial. And when when changes are warranted, we certainly implement them. In this particular case, there were more questions than issues that were raised, and we did our best to answer those questions. It's unfortunate that Dimitri wasn't aware of that, and as Ms. Riley mentioned, that may have been a product of the fact that the mailers go out, and it's a physical piece of mail that goes out. It goes to the occupant of whichever unit it is intended for, and if the unit is owned by someone else and there's a tenant there, the tenant would get the notice, or should get the notice, and the landlord may not get it. So I think that's what may have happened in this situation.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell, for those comments. I'd like to now go to the committee. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. I was at that community information meeting, and there are a couple concerns that I want to touch on here. Regard to the parking spaces, with 100 spaces for 129 units, there's concern, especially from those that live on Chapman Court, that residents that don't have a parking space will use the street. I'd like to ask through you, Chair, to the developer. I know at their development at W on Sherwood Forest Square, they had a shuttle to the university and back. Are they planning for a similar service at this development?
Mr. Campbell?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, to Councilor Lehman. In conversations with the developer and the ownership group, and we have one of them available to confirm what I'm about to say, you've correctly identified that yes, there is a shuttle that operates at the W, and that a similar shuttle service is planned for this building. However, we did not factor that shuttle service into our justification for parking reduction, but rather the parking reduction is based on the fact that this particular building is located along two major, or at the intersection of two major arterial roads. It's within walking and cycling distance to amenities and the university. And by the fact that we're reducing parking, and there was a good conversation about parking rates right before this item that we may want to remind ourselves of, is that the traffic volumes that would be generated from this development are less than what would otherwise be generated at a utilized commercial development on this site, or an apartment building that provided more parking in of itself. By providing less parking, we're reducing those traffic movements and encouraging active transportation and transit usage. We do have Melissa McGregor here, and she's turned on her video, and maybe I can ask Melissa if she wants to add to that at all.
Yes, thanks, Matt. Through you, Chair. One other item that we did also discuss early in the process is that our property management will also make sure that there are bus and transit schedules available to the tenants, whether those are posted through an online forum or in the lobby. They will be available and encouraged as well. But yes, we will have the shuttle, but as Matt said, that wasn't included in the determination of the quantity of parking spaces available.
Thank you. Councillor Lehman?
Thank you. The other concern, like this development is will be exiting onto Chapman Court, which is just off Sarnia Road. Chapman Court provides access to medium and high density. There was concerns brought up at the community information meeting about residents trying to get into Chapman that are turning left. They're heading westbound on Sarnia and turning left and have to wait for traffic on Sarnia for a spot to get into Chapman. Right now there's a pedestrian crosswalk there, but no traffic lights. Would city staff consider putting in a traffic light to allow access into Chapman after, assuming there's 100 more cars now looking to get in, making that left-hand turn during a day to allow folks that live on Chapman access if they're traveling westerly on Sarnia?
If I could go to Ms. Riley.
Through the chair, it's Mike Corby here. I can answer that for. So basically, we could look at the traffic levels once this development's in place, and if it's warranted that the levels require a traffic light, it's something we would consider at that time. But at this point, it's just based on traffic volumes and based on the initial analysis, they wouldn't be required at this date.
Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that we'll just keep an eye on it and that possibility exists to address those concerns. This is a good development. It's all higher density and a few more stories, but even though it fronts on the Sarnia, which is a major artery, I always look at what's behind, and it's medium and high density, so it fits the neighborhood. I like the look of the building. It's a very prominent place. And the developers presented a really good looking structure here, and I know what they did with the W was a good development as well, and they carried through with their promises on that. So I encourage my fellow colleagues to approve this.
Thank you, Councillor Lehman. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. A quick question about the calculation for the affordable housing. Last meeting, we looked at a building that went from 4 to 6 stories, so saw a 50% lift. In this case, we're seeing 100% lift, and it's got half as much affordable housing. I know that it's going to be hard for us to do relative comparisons, but when we take a look at this, all the reasons Mr. Campbell identified for why parking might not be as much of an issue are also the reasons why we want to see more affordable housing, access to schools, access to transit, access to commercial nodes. It makes a lot of sense here. So, two units seems rather meager considering the amount of lift associated with this increase above the recommended 4.
Yeah, if I could go to city staff regarding the lift and the 2 units of affordable housing.
Through you, Madam Chair, there were discussions with the Housing Development Corporation with Brian and Steve, I believe, a few months ago before staff changes. And I just want to note that this was based on density calculations. The lift was based on density calculations, and therefore the extra 18 extra 18 units were derived at that, and their discussions brought, I guess, forward the 2 that they proposed, and it's also recommended by HDC. So hopefully that clarifies your question.
Yeah, if I might, through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Riley, or perhaps to Mr. Campbell, do we know what the HDC contribution is to the affordable housing offset?
Mr. Campbell? Or
sorry, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Turner. Sorry, I just would like to respond just to the first question first. And Ms. Riley was correct in that the calculation was based on the 1989 plan. And when we look at the policies that apply there, the base density that we have to work with is 150 units per hectare. And this development proposes an additional 18 units per hectare. It's not an additional 18 units, but it's an additional 18 units per hectare. It's actually 14 units. So in preparing our calculations, we looked at 10% of what that 14 unit uplift is, which is 1.4 units, then rounded that up to an additional 2 units. And that was based on standard practice at the time that we did this calculation. And that was certainly vetted through HDC. To your second question, if there's a contribution from HDC, I don't believe that there is any contribution from HDC that's going towards this. This is entirely going, this is at the developer's time. This is as a condition of bonus zoning. And we're well aware of what the requirements from HDC are, and we're certainly agreeable to implementing them into this development. But there certainly isn't any contribution from HDC to this development, if that's what the question is.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Campbell. And through you, Madam Chair, I think Mr. Barrett had his hand up. So
yes, if I could go to Mr. Barrett.
Thank you. Through the chair, actually, I was just going to provide the same comment that Mr. Campbell did. This was based on the London plan densities outside of central London at 150 units per hectare. So the calculations Mr. Campbell said resulted in an increase. It was 14 units between the 150 units per hectare and the 168 units per hectare that is being recommended in this application. So that was rounded up. With respect to HDC contributions, again, Mr. Campbell correctly said that it's not direct HDC contributions. In fact, the conditions are the conditions that HDC has provided, which are, as again, Mr. Campbell noted, the term of the agreement, the level of affordability, and the fact that the tenant placement, it would be through a tenant placement agreement with the HDC. So in fact, the what I'll use air quotes here, have become sort of standard conditions associated with bonusing are the same conditions that are recommended here as part of this application.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett, through you, Madam Chair. I think part of the where we see like about a 10% lift in terms of density is partly a function of the amount of the footprint of this parcel that building is proposed to take up. It's not a large amount, and the rest of it is kind of surface parking as it goes around, as compared to the Fanshawe Park Road, which had a fairly significant amount of the parcel that's taken up. It's interesting to listen to kind of the hybrid between the official Plan 89 and the London Plan, because we'll use the density calculations in the London Plan, but we're going to take a look at the building heights and bonusing provisions of the 89 plan. I think we'll still continue to be in a bit of a quagmire through this. So notwithstanding my comments on the bonusing, I think this is it's an appropriate building. I think it looks well designed. It looks like it's well sited. It's on two major corridors. It's close to commercial. It's close to transit. It's close to the university. I think there's a lot of great opportunities with it, and I'm supportive of it. However, I'd like us to get to a place where we can finalize our policies for consistency, because to go from 6 to 8 is a 50% jump above what the recommended bonusing would be for height. And I appreciate the clarification between the difference between height and density in terms of the bonusing and how we move around those things. So I'm supportive of the application. I hope that we can find some ground at some point when the London Plan is finalized, that we can make decisions consistent with the plans. And that's where I'm concerned right now, is it's not consistent with the plan. I do think it's appropriate for the height in this neighborhood, in this area. And I haven't heard huge concerns about it as well. So I think that's helpful too. I'm happy to hear the work councillor support as well. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Turner. Any other comments from the committee? I see none. If the committee will allow me just to make a brief comment, I want to thank the public for coming out and bringing to our attention the importance of how we share notices. And as we build apartment buildings like this one, and how we communicate to the public, I think there should be some greater consideration being given, not only by city staff, by anyone holding an open house, how we can provide those notices. I know there are opportunities in lobbies where notices can be put up. I know that goes to further steps, but it is important as we build these apartment buildings. I'm supportive of this application. It fits. It is something that I think is really important. It is close to a lot of amenities, as well as Western, lots of walking opportunities, and also young families, just not students, but young families being able to live in this area, I think is also important. So with that, I would like to remind committee members that the recommendation, there is a bylaw amendment as to the measurement of 29.0 meters and a minimum front yard depth of 0.5 meters. With that, I'd like a motion to approve the recommendation. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Hillier. I see no other comments. If we can proceed to vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
On to our second public participation meeting, 3.2, 551, 555 Waterloo Street. If I can have someone open the public participation meeting. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Lewis.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And with that, I'd like to go to staff for a short verbal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Melanie Vivian, Site Development Planner. Before jumping into a brief overview of the application, I just wanted to know an error in the bylaw presented in the report. The zone requested is the residential R8 special provision zone, the R84 zone, and not the holding residential R5 zone as noted in staff's report. So I do apologize in advance for any confusion this may have caused. So the zoning bylaw amendment application pertaining to the property municipally addressed as 551 to 555 Waterloo Street. So the applicant here is requesting to amend the zone on site to facilitate a 3-story rear addition to the existing building, thereby increasing the total number of dwelling units from 8 units to 10 units, and to permit home occupations within dwelling units in the apartment building. Special provisions are requested to regulate a minimum front yard depth and a minimum north interior side yard depth to recognize existing conditions, as well as a south interior side yard depth, establishing a maximum gross floor area and establishing a maximum height for the proposed addition. A special provision is also requested to include permitting the home occupations within dwelling units in apartment buildings to maximum sizes there. It is worth noting that the existing buildings are designated under the Ontario Heritage Act as they're located within the West Woodfield Heritage Conservation District. It is noted that a heritage impact assessment was received and reviewed by staff and the London Advisory Committee on Heritage. Comments received from Latch advise that it is satisfied with the research, assessment, and conclusions of the heritage impact assessment and is in support of the development. As such, staff is recommending approval of the requested amendment to rezone the subject lands to residential R8 special provision zone. The proposed development is consistent with the provincial policy statement and conforms to the enforced policies of the London Plan and 1989 official plan. The recommended amendment is also consistent with the West Woodfield Heritage Conservation District. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Vivian. Any technical questions? I see none. I'd like to move to the applicant's agent.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, good evening. I know the applicant is here along with other members. I assume you are going to be speaking up to 5 minutes on behalf of the applicant.
Yes, my name is Nick Dajak. I am the planning consultant and agent representing the owner, which is the apartment shop. With me as well is, I believe, Dave Russell from the apartment shop and Alicia Lesniak from A-Link Architecture. I just wanted to say that this is another project that SPM is proud to be a part of. As we're all aware, there's a balance needed between adding density to our mature neighborhoods and without adversely impacting the adjacent neighbors. So this project is what I like to refer to as gentle density. This proposed amendment is seeking the addition of 2 units from 8 to 10 units. It ensures that the front facade of the heritage features viewed from the street are all maintained and keeps the massing and scale of the buildings consistent with the existing streetscape. So all the new development is essentially kept toward the rear of the building and protects the view of the conservation heritage area. So as Ms. Vivian mentioned, there are several requested site-specific provisions, and we believe this is minor. As she mentioned, they are primarily there to keep the existing conditions of the buildings to allow them to exist, as well as a couple of additional provisions to further restrict the zone to allow the subsequent applications for development and building permits to be compatible with the existing buildings and the neighboring lots. So in my opinion, this is a great example of a proper infill within a mature neighborhood. So I hope the committee is also in agreement. And again, myself, the owner, and architect team are here to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Dyack. Is there anyone from the public that would like to make a comment regarding this recommendation? I'll ask one more time. If there's anyone from the public that would like to speak to this application, please come forward. I see none. With that, I would like to go to committee to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
I'd like to go to the committee for a motion or comments, or both. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask a little bit about the, make sure I use the words right, to in-ground garbage collection points, in-ground waste and recycling containers. They're going to be adjacent to the city lane. Is there any kind of standard for separation distance of those? I know not a formal one, but consideration of what an appropriate separation distance is from from a dwelling unit. I do know that some of them can be rather smelly depending on what's put in them. We faced this with an earlier application a couple of years ago. I just want to make sure they're in the right place.
I can go to staff.
Through you, Madam Chair. From what I'm aware of, there's no setback regulations required for the in-ground waste containers. Typically, these ones are to help mitigate some of that smell that you can get. These are going to be private collection as well. And through the process, we did work closely with the applicant to find an appropriate spot for the location of them, as well as accessibility purposes for picking up the garbage.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, do we know what the collection frequency will be?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't have the answer to that. I don't know if the applicant would.
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Dyack.
Through you, Madam Chair, the collection, because it is private, we can establish that collection frequency. Likely it would be weekly or would match the city's collection sequence. There is, I just did want to note, the owner does own lands directly south and uses a very similar collection bin and private pickup as well. So they are already using the system and would match the frequency, so it's done all at the same time.
Councillor Turner.
Okay, thank you. I think that if we can just reflect that in the site plan opportunities, just to make sure that odor mitigation opportunities are there. I recognize that this is there to address that, so I appreciate the work that staff have done in responding to it. One of the things that we have noted from the public comments were concerns about the on-site garbage handling that currently exists with this property. Hopefully this works to address that. One of the challenges with Mullocks is they can go a long time between collections depending on how full they get, and the fuller they get, the smellier they are. So I just wanted to check on the frequency for that reason. So if staff can just note that for the site plan considerations, I'd appreciate that.
Thank you for those comments. I'd like to go to committee for other comments or a motion. Councillor Lehman. We're looking for a motion.
I'll move the staff.
Thank you. I'm looking for a seconder. Councillor Lewis. And I'd like to remind the committee that we are again changing our bylaw, amending it to reflect the R8 that is in the recommendation. So with that, please, we can proceed to vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
To our next public participation meeting for the tow truck impound yard zoning bylaw review. Looking to committee to open up the public participation meeting. Councillor Hillier, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
That we have an added presentation on this review. I'd like to go to staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a review of the zoning bylaw. It's a 3-year review. We're looking for a motion or comments. Councillor Turner.
Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a review of the zoning bylaw. It's a 3-year review. As the chair indicated, the presentation is in the agenda package, but I can pull it up and go through it very quickly.
Yeah, a quick verbal would be fine. Thank you.
Okay. This zoning review is occurring as a result of some business licensing issues we've had in the past. We're assisting compliance services and business licensing with this review. Zoning is involved, so this is something that planning typically deals with. So they asked for our assistance in doing this zoning bylaw review. And the review is occurring essentially for two reasons. There's new London Plan place type policies, particularly with regards to industrial uses, and also the recent introduction of business licenses for these uses. In 2017, 2 additional licensing categories were added. And then in 2021, an additional 2 different business licenses were initiated for tow truck businesses and impound yard businesses. And part of the process for a business license application is a zoning bylaw review. And it was found that going through this process that a lot of the uses, that a lot of the existing sites, there's 18 of them, were not zoned to allow either a tow truck business or an impound yard. Because there was an existing business licensing situation, instead of asking each operator to apply for a zoning bylaw amendment on each of the properties, the city initiated this zoning bylaw review on their behalf. And in the interim, we issued conditional business licenses so the businesses could carry on until the review was done. So as I said, under the new London Plan and in previous official plans, we have a variety of different industrial place types and designations, one being heavy industrial, one being light industrial, and commercial industrial. And the difference between them is the impacts that they create. Heavy industrial tends to have the more unsightly uses. Light industrial is for cleaner industrial uses. And commercial industrial allows that mix of sort of light industrial uses and commercial uses. And a lot of the uses within these zones are and place types are differentiated on the basis of impact. Impact being noise, emissions, and also unsightliness. And also, secondly, on the amount of outdoor storage they're allowed to have. If you look at the London Plan policies, there's also policies in there regarding outdoor storage along highways 401 and 402. And that's sort of an economic development concern about traffic going by these sites and creating a bad impression of London, or a sort of a not a very nice impression of London.
Thank you.
So there are current zoning bylaw regulations which apply to outdoor storage. In summary, heavy industrial and general industrial allow more open storage than light industrial does. 75% in the former and 15% in the latter. There are existing setbacks from residential uses and other sensitive land uses already included in the zoning bylaw, and those will be maintained. So after the review, we actually held a meeting with the operators of the businesses and got their concerns. And after our review and listening to their comments, we've made a number of changes to the zoning bylaw. We've added new definitions. We've revised existing definitions. And we've also expanded the number of locations where you can have these uses. One of the comments we heard at the community meeting was that there weren't enough sites for these uses. So we've expanded the number of zones that you're allowed to have these uses in from 4 up to 14 different zones. And that's differentiated between a tow truck business and an impound yard. Impound yards are a little more sensitive about because of the amount of outdoor storage, and also the London Plan policies, which try and preclude these uses along major transportation corridors. So we've also made some changes to our site location regulations, precluding outdoor storage in front and exterior side yards. We've increased the amount of open storage allowed in the light industrial zone from 15 to 25%. And we've also increased the amount of open storage allowed in the general and heavy industrial zones from 75 to 95%. So as I said in summary, we've increased the number of zones where these uses are permitted from 4 to 14. And we've also looked at the existing sites which are out there. There's 18 different sites, and there's no site-specific zoning bylaws required for these sites. Most of the changes we made have accommodated most of the uses. There are 4 existing sites where they don't conform to the zoning because they never had zoning for these sites before. So any uses would be legal non-conforming. And then we have 2 additional sites where the London Plan place type wouldn't allow this use in the long term. So at some point, there may be some need for them to move elsewhere to a site that can accommodate them. But for all intents and purposes, we don't need any site-specific zoning on these sites to recognize them. And that's our recommendation. If you have any comments or questions, I'd be happy to ask them.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Any technical questions from committee? I see none. Moving on to the public, is there anyone here that would like to speak to this review? Is there someone in committee room 5? If you, is there? We just need the microphone working. Welcome, sir. Can you hear me? I'm unable to hear anyone in committee room 5. If we could just take a moment.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you now. Welcome, sir, to the Planning and Environment Committee meeting. It's a public participation. If you can state your name and address if you wish, and you have up to 5 minutes. Please proceed.
My name is Nick with MNK Towing and Recovery, and 2680 Dundas is our location. So they sent out an email last week with all the different changes that they've wanted to make and everything like that. And our site was one that they say cannot go on. And I'm just really confused by that because our yard, we conform to not going over the 25% or was 15% before. We're on Dundas Road, so Highway 2, but it looks clean from the outside. We have banners up to kind of protect the view from the road as well. Just really confused. And there's a salvage yard right next door to me. So I'm just really confused on how our site is not conforming to these changes.
Can we have your address, please?
2680 Dundas?
This is the address of the site.
Correct.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Yeah, that's it. Like, I'm just really kind of baffled about how they're saying that our site doesn't conform to what they're looking for. And, you know, our site is cleaner than most, accessible. We don't exceed the percentages. There's a lot of car dealers right by us that look more like a scrapyard than we do as an impound yard. Yeah, I'm just really confused. That's why I came here to talk about that.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to make a comment? I see none. I will ask one more time if there's anyone from the public that would like to make a comment on the tow truck impound yard zoning bylaw review. Please come forward. I see none. I'll go to the committee to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Lewis.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Committee members, I will go to staff to help assist the public with the confusion about the address at 26 Dundas Street not being included in the site, allowing the site to be part of the review and including it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In response to Nick's question as to why we never recognized that particular site, I went back through the zoning on the site, and it's never been zoned for an impound yard, that site. It wasn't formerly in a township of West Missouri, and the industrial uses that were permitted didn't include an impound yard. And this is one of the issues that came up through the licensing process, is that at that time, that property was never zoned for an impound yard. Now, through the amendments that we've made, we've allowed the tow truck business on the site, but we haven't zoned it to allow an impound yard because of its location on a major transportation corridor. And a lot of the London Plan policies speak to not allowing a lot of open storage along major transportation corridors, be it the 401, the 402, the VMP, or other major transportation corridors into the city. So that's why we didn't recognize that particular use on that property, although a towing business would be allowed.
Thank you for that clarification. Moving on to committee members for comments. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. There were some concerns raised about this might not create a fair playing field for large versus small operators. I'd like to go through you, Chair, to staff and just have them comment on how this, the changes being made would affect smaller operators versus larger.
Mr. Parker?
Through the chair, this is one of the comments we received at the meeting of business owners. And by increasing the number of zones where you could have these uses, that would hopefully help the smaller operators and not allow for others to sort of monopolize all of the sites. As I said in the report before, there was only 4 zones that these uses were allowed in. Now that has been increased to 14, so there should be more locational options for everybody, be it small, be it large operators, for these uses. As long as they're in locations, particularly with regards to impounding yards, that they aren't visible and they're hidden or properly screened from view.
Councillor Lehman?
Thank you.
Councillor Van Hulst?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the work. And I wanted to ask a question through you. Just help me understand a little bit. How does this distinguish between a scrapyard and an impound lot? The differences in there.
Mr. Parker?
The main difference is that scrap yards tend to have cars piled on top of each other. There's parts. There's chopping down some vehicles for reuse. Whereas an impound yard is just where vehicles are stored temporarily. It could be on a daily basis, could be on a weekly or even monthly basis. for various reasons. One is that they were illegally parked, others that they were in an accident. So that's what's normally included in an impound yard. Scrap yards tend to be a lot larger as well, and also typically have a retail component to them where they tear down cars and then sell the parts to the public for reuse in other vehicles.
Councillor Van Hulst? Are you good?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's good. Madam Chair, I was maybe just describe, and I realize this is being done in conjunction with our bylaw and enforcement department. Let me describe one of the problems that happens in this industry. Of course, the vast majority of operators do this legitimately. I've had people describe some of the scams that go on here in the industry at times. What would happen is
Councillor Van Hulst, I don't mean to interrupt, but are you making comments just before we go to the committee, or I just want to sort of understand.
Okay, so Madam Chair, what I'd hope to do is describe what we've seen that may go on, and then ask how our zoning changes might assist with some of those things.
Okay,
so
please proceed.
Yeah. Okay. So what has happened is that someone will get in an accident. It may be minor. Someone will come with a tow truck, give you a card, and tow it away. Then you may find out that if you were savvy and looked at it, that the bill had been padded. You might be charged for dollies, for having it pulled out of the ditch, for having the things cleaned up on the road when that's not the responsibility. And so it's a higher cost. Then you might realize that there's no address on the card, so you don't really know where your car is. You have to call and take a number of days to find out when it's there. Perhaps even over the weekend, it's not open. So all of a sudden, when you might have been able to get your car in a couple days, it might be a week. And then the costs for that, when added to the insurance for the repair, all of a sudden mean your vehicle is no longer, it's simply written off. And so that vehicle remains in the lot as now as an asset to the impound car owner, who keeps those there. And sometimes in the lots, they pile up a long time until scrap prices go up, and then they move a whole bunch of cars out to the scrap yard.
And your question, Councillor Van Hulst, to staff is?
Yes, so the question is, that was one of the problems with this. How does this portion of our action help with that at all? Does it clear up that issue somewhat, or?
Yes, I'll go to Mr. Parker. Thank you.
Actually, through the chair, I think Ms. Musico can answer that question better than I can. My focus is mainly on the zoning, and Ms. Musico's got her hand up.
Yes, thank you for helping me out there. Ms. Musico?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, I'm going to answer this question in two parts, or three parts rather. So tonight's presentation and proposal is strictly about land use matters, but I can certainly address Councillor Van Hulst's questions. One he had about the handing out of cards or the identification of the business at the scene of an accident. All of those requirements are dealt through something called a commercial vehicle operator's registration, which every single tow truck company needs. And again, that's a registration through the ministry. So all of those requirements are stipulated through that mechanism. What we've done with the business licensing bylaw in terms of fees, we have prescribed very, very specific fees for towing services and impound services related to accident scenes. So for example, for towing services, there's a maximum of a $275 charge. The only additional fee that they can charge is $100 for winching. Then there's a fee for larger vehicles. So in terms of any questions about the padding of bills, our bylaw specifically regulates exactly what these businesses can charge for. If I've missed any questions, certainly let me know and I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. Councillor Van Hulst, does that answer your questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
That's fine.
And with that, I'd like to go to committee. I'm looking for a motion regarding the recommendation before us. Councillor Turner. Looking
Move
for a
to staff
seconder.
recommendation.
Thank you. Looking for a seconder in Councillor Lewis. And with that, any further comments? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, I think that, first of all, I want to thank staff for the significant amount of work they put into trying to find a way to bring these things together. I think the fact that so many of these locations were in such diverse locations and not always appropriate locations reflects the entire reason why we needed to bring in both a business licensing bylaw around tow trucks as well as look at zoning around tow truck businesses and impound yards. It really was something that was operating with very little regulation out there and frankly very little consumer protection. And that's not to say that, that's not to point to any particular business and say that they weren't doing that. And Councillor Van Hulst alluded to the fact that sometimes there are operations that have no physical presence in London, frankly, and come in and people find their vehicles impounded in a completely different community from where they live. But I think this is an important step that we can take for the municipality in terms of our own, taking care of our own backyard and our own housekeeping and making sure that these are located in appropriate locations for fabrics of the neighborhood, for the zoning that happens around industrial areas as well, and for the kind of presentation that we want to have to the access points where people are coming into our communities. So I know that it's not one that's going to make everybody happy, but I think that we've landed in a spot where very, very reasonable steps have been taken to be as accommodating as possible to the existing operations, but really lay down some ground rules for any future operations that are coming forward as well in terms of where these can be located. So thanks to everybody for the work that's gone into this, and hopefully this will provide the solution that we're looking for.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. And with that, I'd like to proceed to vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And with that, we're going to move on to the next item that is scheduled for a public participation meeting 3.4 for 1521 Sunningdale Road West and 2631 Hyde Park Road. Committee, I'd like to open the public participation meeting. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And I know usually we do a staff presentation. I would like to go to either Mr. Barrett or Mr. Felberg for just some opening remarks, please.
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Perfect.
So just like to provide a little bit of context to what you and the committee have before you this evening. After I complete some opening remarks, I'll pass it over to Ms. Curtis, who will walk you through the proposed development. So the application at 1521 Hyde Park Road has been presented to this committee twice before. The first time in May of 2021, when Planning and Environment Committee referred the report back to staff to work with the school board and the developer to see if there was an opportunity to support the Thames Valley District School Board on the timing of school construction in the northwest area of the city. In September or early October of 2021, staff brought the report back to this committee with the same recommendation as the May 2021 report, and direction was provided to consider this property within a neighborhood place type and environmental review. Subsequent to that October direction, the city received a draft plan application in December of 21 and have been working with the applicant to structure zoning and draft conditions consistent with the neighborhood place type. Recognizing that these lands are currently within the UGB and the future development of the surrounding lands are not known, the report before you today offers a recommendation that we feel meets council's direction and those policies in the London Plan. As we get into finer details, decisions about how the proposed development ties into surrounding lands, we're relying on control points in existing developments to the south and southeast. For example, the center line of Jordan Boulevard, which is the street on the south side of Sunningdale Road, a neighborhood connector, lines up with the proposed north-south Street A of this development. Additionally, staff are also proposing to defer a few items to later stages in the approval process. Typically, we'd prefer to have all of these higher order studies completed, but in this case, the applicant has agreed to undertake an EA addendum to the Fox Hollow Swim EA and complete the natural heritage assessments prior to the submission of detailed engineering studies. To facilitate this, we have a number of holding provisions and draft conditions that will allow us to adjust buffers and development limits following the completed studies. And just one last point before I pass off to Ms. Curtis, I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank her and Mr. Johnson for their work in coordinating what has been a complex planning process and public input process. It may have also been a bit confusing for members of the public as the timing of the PPM has changed along with the 3 different presentations of this report over the past year. At this point, Madam Chair, I'd like to pass the virtual microphone over to Ms. Curtis and she can provide an overview of the subdivision application.
Thank you, Mr. Feldberg. Ms. Curtis.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Hopkins, this is Allison Curtis on behalf of Planning and Development for item 3.4, which can be found on page 288 of the agenda package. As noted, this application is for a draft plan of subdivision and associated official plan and zoning bylaw amendments at 1521 Sunningdale Road West and 2631 Hyde Park Road. The subject lands are located in the northwest quadrant of the city at the intersection of Sunningdale Road West and Hyde Park Road. The site is approximately 20.5 hectares in size, contains an unevaluated wetland, and about 6 residential lots. The lands are surrounded by residential uses directly to the south, while the lands to the north, east, and west are located outside of the urban growth boundary and are zoned, designated, and used for agricultural purposes. The draft plan of subdivision presented on slide 4 proposes a good mix of land use types within the neighborhood. There are both low and medium density residential blocks to provide for a range of housing types and densities, as well as a park and open space block to provide for recreational opportunities. The lands will be serviced by 5 new streets, 2 of which are proposed new neighborhood connectors, and there are potential connections to the adjacent lands included. Official plan amendments are considered to facilitate this development on the direction of Municipal Council. The recommended designations include the open space, low density residential, and multifamily medium density residential under the 1989 official plan, and the green space and neighborhoods place types under the London plan. The lands are currently zoned as holding open space, and the new designations include recommendations for zoning that offer a mix of residential zones to provide a range of options in terms of housing form and density, as well as open space zones that will provide for recreational and stormwater management services. I draw your attention to the recommended zoning on slide 5, and in particular block 17 fronting onto Sunningdale Road. The OS1 and residential zones are included on this block as the extent of land required for stormwater management is yet to be determined. The completion of the EA addendum identified by Mr. Felberg will determine what is required and the residential zones may be removed. Holding provisions for looping, of securities, assessment of natural heritage, urban design, site plan, and servicing have been applied to the subject lands, and the zoning amendment, including these holding provisions, was provided to committee today. We apologize that this was not included in the report. Comments and concerns were received from the community, some of which include access to the subdivision, increased traffic and noise levels, grading of development and the existing land uses, compatibility of the proposed development, an alignment with the provincial policy statement, the 1989 official plan, and the London plan. As per the report, these issues can be addressed through the detailed engineering review process, implementation of holding provisions, and completion of additional studies. As noted, there is an unevaluated wetland and potentially significant wildlife habitat contained within the subject lands. In addition, the environmental impact study and hydrogeological assessment were identified as incomplete. Addressing these incomplete reports is a condition of draft approval to be completed prior to the focused design studies phase. This will help to accurately identify and delineate the natural feature and potentially significant wildlife habitat, as well as determine if any additional buffers are required. The applicant is amenable to this requirement. Prior to this application, the subject lands had not been considered or studied for development as part of the development charge background studies, and as such, servicing had also not been considered. Through the review of the draft plan, the city and the applicant have agreed to conditions that will allow for a mix of temporary and permanent servicing solutions for these lands. Through the detailed design phase of this application, work plans and servicing strategies will be finalized and included in a subdivision agreement. The applicant has also requested the city consider installing services as part of the Sunningdale Road upgrade project planned for 2025. Following detailed design, the city will consider this as an option, but at the developer's cost. Further to the direction of Municipal Council on October 15th, 2021, it is on the recommendation of the Director of Planning and Development that the directed official plan amendments and recommended zoning bylaw amendments be introduced at the Municipal Council meeting on May 3rd, 2022. That Municipal Council be advised of any issues raised at the public meeting with respect to the application for draft plan of subdivision, and that the approval authority be advised that the Municipal Council supports issuing draft approval of the proposed draft plan of subdivision, subject to prescribed conditions and red line revisions. Thank you, Madam Chair. This concludes my presentation, and staff are available to address any of your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Curtis. Any technical questions from committee? I see none. I'll move on to the applicant. I know Mr. Campbell from Zelenka Priamo is here on behalf of the applicant. I can see the applicant from Auburn. Mr. Stapleton is here, as well as Tim Stubgen from Stantec as well. So, Mr. Campbell, you have up to 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And again, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you for that microphone check. I appreciate it. We don't have a particularly large amount of information to add to the staff report. It was quite comprehensive, and we're certainly supportive of its conclusions. I know there's been quite a bit of history with this particular application, and we believe that this is at a great point for a committee to be able to make a decision on it. We have all the facts available to present to committee, and we think that staff has done a good job of portraying them. I would like to take the opportunity to thank staff for their work on this, as well as council and committee's direction for looking at the development of these lands. Madam Chair, as you've noted, Mr. Stapleton and others are available for any questions that the committee may have, and I can also answer those as well. So we would certainly encourage the committee to approve the staff recommendation that's presented before you today.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Moving on now to the public, I would like to, I do have a list, and I would like to first go to Richard Cracknell. Mr. Cracknell, if you're here?
Yes, Chair, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Well, thank you very much.
Want to welcome you to the Planning and Environment Committee, a public participation meeting. You can state your address if you wish, and you have up to 5 minutes. So please proceed.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name's Richard Cracknell, and I live at 1535 Sunningdale Road West. I'd like to address the use of the land to the north and east of my property, a stormwater management facility identified as Block 28. Block 28 is new. It's never been presented before in any revision until 2 weeks ago. The proposed facility will be 4 feet from the foundation of my house. I have requested an engineering report from the city that supports the use of this land as a stormwater facility, but have yet to receive one. I wish I could provide comment on the type of drain, grading, and flow, but I am unable to. The R1 designation in Block 14 has been dropped, thus decreasing the amount of permeable soil for stormwater absorption. I feel this increase in surface water will be pushed towards my house, raising the risk of flooding. My insurance broker is of the opinion that locating a stormwater management facility so close to the foundation of my house will most likely lead to my inability to purchase flood insurance. I would like assurances from the city that I will be able to continue to purchase flood insurance before proceeding with this zoning application. As well, I have not seen a new report with respect to the increased noise levels created by the change in density of Block 14. As for Block 15, I fail to see how the city could allow for the possibility of 2 residential homes being surrounded by institutional restricted office buildings. A separate block should be created for those types of designations located away from the current residential homes. We have received notices for this meeting. The attached proposed zoning plan is materially different from anything previously proposed. It introduced 2 new roads, a new storm water management facility, along with a change in the requested zoning designations. I fail to see the relevance of the previous supporting documents provided by the applicant to support the current application. It is obvious to me that the planning process has become an ad hoc, and this will lead to long-term planning issues. For the past 2 years, we have been subjected to several versions of this planning application. The most recent requests for written comments was for December 2021 and was for a plan we're not even discussing tonight. A lot of effort has been put into those comments. That was time that was wasted. Then we received a notice for a meeting on March 25th. I started preparing my comments for that plan. Several days later, we received a notice that the meeting was canceled. One of the definitions of harassment is asking someone to do something repeatedly for no purpose. This process has left my family and myself exasperated, okay? And honestly, after hearing staff's report, I can't believe that I am addressing this right now. I'm going to stop there, Chair, because I'm going to go off script.
Thank you, Mr. Cracknell. I'd like to now go to Bridget Denda. Welcome, Ms. Denda. Please state your name and address if you wish, and you have up to 5 minutes. And before you do that, could you just speak into the microphone so we can?
Hello?
Yes, please proceed.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, my name's Bridget Denda, and I live at 2545 Hyde Park Road with my husband and my 3 small children. When we bought our house back in 2012, we were told the surrounding land was never to be built on. It would be used for farmland cemetery use. We enjoy having our privacy knowing we have only one neighbor. The proposed developments behind us and beside us affect our ability to have reasonable enjoyment of our property for everyday living, especially with our 3 small children. The significant increase in density will result in significant increase in noise from the land behind and beside us. We depend on our well for water. We have not been informed on how grading will affect our ability to maintain the well and provide adequate drinking water for our family. Our home was bought to be our forever home, and now we feel like this is a huge negative impact on our future and our children's future, and this makes us feel uneasy not knowing what our future holds. We are concerned about the effect this will have on our property value, as our home will be out of place and not compatible with what is being proposed. From referencing to the notice of the application, we have noted that the proposed zoning is inconsistent with the existing density and building type. The proposal asks for an increase in density significantly beside and behind our house. It asks for the ability to put in apartments with lower level businesses and row housing, which is incompatible with existing structures. We also feel that will be significant increase in noise levels because of the proposed densities. The row of trees and bushes surrounding my property will not be suitable to buffer for privacy and noise, as the lower half of my bushes are bare and absolutely does not contain any noise within our backyard. We are absolutely heartbroken over the changes to come around our house, as this was not what we have hoped for our future. For these reasons, we do not want the City of London to change the current zoning. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to now proceed to Laura Renier. Laura, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you. I understand that you are going to be, your husband is unable to join you. I just want to confirm that.
That's correct.
And the request is that you're able to speak on his behalf?
Yes.
And with that, committee members, I would need the committee's support to allow Ms. Renier to go over her 5 minutes and speak on behalf of herself as well as her husband. And I see one hand up looking for committee's request to extend the 5 minutes allotted. I don't see any. Deputy Mayor Morgan, everyone's nodding. Okay, looks, I see one is not in support, but I do have the majority of committee does support the extension. So, Councillor Turner?
Madam Chair, if I could at least suggest we call a vote on that. It's far from, would not be unanimous. I don't support the extension. It's the same household, the same points. I don't quite see the purpose of the extension for that reason.
Okay, I'd like to go to our secretary to see if we can take a vote on it then. It looks like the motion is to allow Mrs. Renier to speak for longer than 5 minutes. If we can proceed to vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-2.
If Ms. Renier, you are allowed the extension, if you can state your name, address, and you have the 5-minute extension up to 10 minutes. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I reside at 1445 Sunningdale Road West. I am speaking today on behalf of myself and my spouse to protect our legal rights as the revised draft plan of subdivision is introducing a hazard adjacent to our property with known serious health risks and access egress concerns, and the proposed block 14 area density is not in keeping with the character of our existing neighborhood. We do not support the applicant's planning application, draft plan of subdivision, and request for zoning bylaw amendment. We have concerns about the overall planning process to date. For 2 years, we have been addressing related official plan, zoning bylaw amendments, and draft plan of subdivision revisions. Our submitted comments for the canceled March 28th Planning Committee meeting rescheduled for today are now mostly irrelevant. The planning report was only made available to us 1 business day prior to this meeting. We were not provided with reasonable time to review or the opportunity to submit relevant written comments for this radically revised draft plan of subdivision. We have serious health and access egress concerns with proposed Street A running parallel to the west side of our property, with access at Sunningdale Road to align with Jordan Boulevard. First, in 2012, a draft plan of subdivision was approved for lands on the south side of Sunningdale that showed a right in, right out only access for Street G, now Jordan Boulevard. At the time, the Transportation Engineering Review raised concerns regarding the proposed local street connection to Sunningdale, our driveway, and measures must be taken to mitigate any impacts. Then at a subsequent 2018 draft plan extension report, where no notice was provided to us, changed this intersection to a full turning movements. Public notice should have been provided due to the serious safety access issues, as a full movement intersection at this location is dangerously close to our driveway. Now, this radically revised draft plan proposes that Street A run parallel to our property is proposed to be a main entrance for the subdivision access to Sunningdale Road. This access is only 30 meters away from our driveway and not in keeping with the City of London access management guideline that state a minimum corner clearance of 60 meters should be provided to an existing driveway at a controlled intersection. A turning lane for Street A grading would also significantly encroach on our land. We have serious health concerns with Street A being adjacent to our property. Traffic is a big source of nitrogen dioxide, ultrafine particles, and black carbon near roads, all of which have been associated with adverse health outcomes, including asthma, cancer, cardiovascular, respiratory, and cognitive impairment. Metal particle pollutants from braking and tires are even more dangerous than exhaust. Elevated air pollution levels can be found up to 250 meters away from major roads, according to University of Toronto research. People living in that area could see significant health impacts occurring even at comparatively low levels. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies outdoor air pollution as carcinogenic to humans, and exhaust from motor vehicles is a major contributor to outdoor air pollution. Proposed Street A placement along our property will expose us to inaccessible concentration levels of traffic-related pollution, infiltrating our backyard and even our home, making both toxic to our health. A street wall will not block this health risk. According to Public Health Ontario, there should be a buffer zone when planning land use between busy streets and existing homes. There is no such buffer zone proposed between Street A and our property. We have serious noise concerns regarding proposed Street A traffic and the medium density Block 14 development. Again, research. A complete noise analysis has not been provided. These subject lands were only included within the city boundary as open space after the city was instructed by an OMB ruling to find a way to allow the land to be used for the purposes of a cemetery. The open space land use designation, Chapter 8A, is applied to lands which are to be maintained as park space or in a natural state. These lands include private or public, and I thought were recognized by council as having a citywide, regional, or provincial significance. Farmland is considered significant. If the OMB ruling, LPAT, zoning, if that ruling, the zoning, the intent and purpose for this farmland does not exist, open space for the purposes of a cemetery, why is it not more appropriate to redesignate these lands as agriculture? We question the overall planning processes to date that are pushing to rezone this open space into a multi-residential standalone development when there is no guarantee if or when any surrounding farmland will or should be included within the urban growth boundary. Does the city not, does the city not have close to 20 years worth of development land available? This farmland is a significant, valuable natural resource. What is the rationale for not following the planning department's October 20 2021 recommendation to wait for a comprehensive review of the urban growth boundary, area infrastructure requirements, transportation, 2021 Canada Census information, etc. Canada Census information will be released over the course of 2022 that will add value and guidance to long-term planning, such as the percentage of households in the city with extended multi-generational family units consisting of grandparents, parents, children, siblings, and their children. This means, by not considering this, means overcrowding at schools, significantly more traffic than on the applicant's traffic impact analysis reports, noise, and other overcrowding issues. In keeping with the provincial policy statement on how and where to grow, which speaks to building complete communities and protecting agricultural lands to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and ensure communities are more resilient to the impacts of changing climate, it seems that this farmland area, 200 acres, should be planned as a whole complete community that includes subject lands and adjacent farmland, if ever included within the urban growth boundary. We question the appropriateness of creating a bylaw to change the official plan in support of this sprawl development that does not align with the long-term difficult environmental planning issues identified within the provincial and London plan. Why the push by several council members? Is there a concern that this land could be removed from the urban growth boundary with the boundary review? This has been going on for 2 years. To be very clear, we are very concerned about the serious health hazard and access issues associated with Street G and noise-related health issues from proposed Street A and housing densities greater than R4, and are prepared to appeal any plan approval that introduces a health hazard next to our property. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Renier. Moving on to the next resident I have is Mohammed Musa. Mohammed Musa.
Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. If you could state your address if you wish, Mr. Musa, and you have up to 5 minutes.
It's Mohammed Musa, 155 Thornton Ave. Let me just start by saying, I think so far I'm the only one who is not a neighbor of this property. So anyone who knows me knows that I'm far from being anti-development. What I am is I am pro good planning principles. This does not meet that threshold. Let me just start by saying that having read the application and staff's the application, this could be put onto any property, whether adjoining or anywhere else in the city. For the most part, I mean, environmentally sensitive land aside, this whole application could be placed, overlapped on anything there. It's very generic. Respectfully to staff, I'm not saying it's not good. It is very much, we don't have any geotechnical, any hydrogeological, any of that other stuff. And it's very generic. And I'm not taking away from staff, like I said, respectfully, it was well put together. But if you read it very carefully, buried in there is that standalone, this has been rejected. And the recommendation really is that it needs to be rejected. The recommendation in there is, if you read between the lines, going from OS3 to, R has been rejected before and no comment is being made on that. Make no mistake about it, you are reopening up the urban growth boundary. You are creating a new swap where you pit neighbor against neighbor and planning nightmares. You are doing that if you approve this. And you heard the opening statement, the preamble by Mr. Feldberg, as to, to give this context. This property was brought into the urban growth boundary for the sole use of the cemetery by a decision made by the OMB in 1998, a verbal decision. It's not just open space, which a lot of people are stating, it's OS3, specifically and solely for the use of the cemetery and any ancillary uses. So you may think these are academic arguments, but appeals are all based on academic arguments. One thing I will add is, sorry, am I close to my time?
You have approximately 1 minute and 40 seconds.
Thank you. I thought I heard something in the background. Appendix F, which is Provincial Policy Statement 1.1.1. I need to read it to you directly. I need to pull it up as to what the role of council is. Healthy, livable, and safe communities are sustained by accommodating, Part B, accommodating an appropriate, affordable, and market-based range of multi-residential types, including single, detached, and additional, institutional, including places of worship, cemeteries, and long-term care homes. Institutional. I'm emphasizing that because a healthy mix of, you are removing institutional and putting, if this passes, and putting residential in its place. I would go through, I don't have enough time, I'd go through the history of the holding provisions on these properties where in 2001, there was an attempted removal of holding provisions, which they were. Site plan was requested for cemetery, but somehow that fell through the cracks. I had a question the last time. When was the last time that City of London did an OS3 to either a residential or agricultural change in zoning? And have you checked with the MGCS and BAO in regard to how this would be performed?
You have 30 seconds left.
30 seconds. I see nothing about MDSs, minimum distance separations. There is something next door that is capable of holding livestock. I won't spend too much time on that. You're trading off, you're taking out 3.14
Mr. Musa,
hectares.
if you can conclude, please.
This will be the last point. Taking out 3.14 hectares, changing it from residential for the next item, and you are attempting to approve 20.5 acres, a factor of 7-fold. A fair point would be to take, if you're going to take out 3.14, add 3.14 out of the institutional and keep it zoned as OS3.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you for your
Musa.
time. Thank you.
Moving on to, I have next on my list, Ali Joma. Please come forward, sir. State your address if you wish, and you have up to 5 minutes. Please proceed.
Yeah, my name is Ali Joma. We're at 1431 Sunningdale Road West. We are on the north side as well, immediately adjacent to the land that we are discussing. Madam Chair, the Council, the Planning Committee, and the City of London, we are concerned that the proposed development of the lands, without taking into consideration the surrounding properties to the north and east, will result in an inefficient development pattern in the area. The proposed development, in terms of its servicing requirements and to create an efficient land use pattern, needs to take into consideration the overall needs of the surrounding lands. This should include a requirement for infrastructure planning in the area to achieve cost-effective development patterns and application of standards to minimize the land consumption and servicing costs. This approach will ensure that the necessary infrastructure and public services facilities are or will be accessible to the surrounding lands that are also ripe for development opportunities. Again, it is appropriate that the infrastructure for the proposed development be coordinated and integrated with the surrounding properties, which is consistent with the policies of the PPS 2020 and the London Plan. Such an approach will promote development in the area that is comprehensive and integrated into the surrounding area. Servicing of these lands needs to take into consideration the surrounding lands and be part of the comprehensive development and servicing strategy. There's no mention in this document that was presented of planned sanitary services and how it's integrated with the planned infrastructure of the whole area. The sanitary previously was planned to come from the east, but now that has changed, and there has not been proper planning in this respect. It is appropriate that the necessary infrastructure for the proposed development be configured in such a manner as to meet current and project needs in the area. There is no indication or confirmation that this has been achieved. The development needs to be completed in such a way so as to ensure the timely provision of the infrastructure to meet current and project needs. It is clear that there is considerable development pressure on the area, and the servicing should be developed in such a manner so as it can easily be integrated with the surrounding properties. A comprehensive approach to development in this area is required to ensure that any development is integrated with the appropriate infrastructure planning. The development of the land for residential land uses without consideration of the surrounding lands to the north and east will result in an inefficient development pattern that should be avoided. The London Plan, through its policy framework, instructs that all municipal services are to be planned on a systems basis, requiring that the entire system be considered when planning for a single property, such as the case here. The impacts of the increased traffic on the local road network and the needs of the surrounding community should be taken into consideration through a comprehensive and integrated approach, considering the impacts associated with the long-term development of the area. We are concerned that the proposal results in ad hoc planning, creates servicing constraints on the surrounding area, and fails to provide sufficient facilities to support the proposed development. In conclusion, it is our position that the proposal is premature until such a time as the development of the surrounding lands are also taken into consideration in the area development in a comprehensive manner through the integration of services and long-term planning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joma. I have next on my list, Mr. Ahmed Al-Turk.
Mr. Ahmed is with me.
He's welcome to make comments if he wishes.
It is the same comment. I'd just like to add one more thing that through my communication with the city, my understanding for the last 20 years, that the storm and the sanitary for the whole area was coming from the east side of the city towards our property and towards the next door property. I tried to connect with the city to find out what's happening with the sanitary on that issue. And my understanding that it has been changed without any study, without any comprehensive study for the area, and without understanding what's going on as far as the services for the rest of the area. That is my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Turk. And I'd like to ask if there's anyone else that would like to speak to this application, please come forward. And I'll ask one more time if there's anyone here from the public that would like to make comments to this application, please come forward. And with that, I'd like to go to the committee to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Hillier, seconded by Councillor Lewis.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And I'd like to go to the committee for comments. Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's important always to frame the discussion that we get a motion on the floor. So I'm going to move the staff recommendation so that we can then have a discussion around that, and we'll see where that leads us.
I'll need a seconder. Councillor Hillier? So there is a motion on the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to share some comments on this now in terms of this application. And of course, we know that it's related to the next item that we'll be dealing with in terms of the school as well. So I'm going to say right off the bat that although it may not be a usual process, I think when we're talking about these applications, we have to think in tandem in fact that there's a community benefit coming here. And I know that'll be outlined later in the next item. But I want to go back to a piece of feedback that I heard, and I want to share some other comments as well. In terms of the staff recommendation previously was to refuse. Well, actually, the previous staff recommendation was to put a community growth place type designation. It wasn't to support the application that had come forward previously, but it was not to leave it as open space. It was to create a community growth designation, and that was in the slide deck in the original presentation, because this is inside the urban growth boundary. And however it got there, it is inside the urban growth boundary where we want development to happen. There's been a lot of I've seen a number of comments in emails and even on social media about this being a sprawl application. You know, it was the last cycle of this committee that we received a report from Professor Mike Moffat with regard to the explosion of residential growth outside the city limits. And I think that we have to ask ourselves, if we were to say no to this application, to a development inside the urban growth boundary, how many more homes is it going to push being built out in Ilderton or in Mount Bridges or in Dorchester or Thorndale? Because that is the pattern that we are seeing. And if we want to talk about sprawl, the worst kind of sprawl, the worst thing that we can do to respect agricultural land is to push residential growth out into the county, where it's not only going to likewise take over prime agricultural land, but we have to be realistic. The jobs that people buying those residential properties outside the city are working are not moving out to the county with them. They are in fact going to be commuting into London daily for those jobs, for their kids' recreational activities, for shopping reasons. So we're actually going to extend their commute. When we want to talk about the impact of sprawl and greenhouse gases and the climate emergency action plan, the worst thing we can do is push people to drive further from their residence to their place of employment, to their place of education, to their place of entertainment. So, you know, we've also heard some comments about how it needs to be developed with a secondary plan and in inclusion of all the other blocks around it. We put in place secondary plans in developed areas all the time. Not too long ago at this committee, we were talking about the Wellington Gateway secondary plan for the development of the bus rapid transit corridor along Wellington Road. That area is built out, and there will be changes in that area as the secondary plan gets developed and brought forward. But it's a secondary plan that's coming after development. And the same thing can happen here. And we heard through our staff report, and the staff recommendations are in place, and there are some conditions that protect this from being just simply a rubber stamp. The developer is going to have to meet a number of conditions along the way. But we heard already that there are road lineups planned as it's mapped out today, so that they will connect with other imagined opportunities in the future Presuming, of course, that the 2023 urban growth boundary review brings other parcels in, which it may or may not. I'm certainly not, respectfully, I'm not supportive of the notion that this has to wait until a comprehensive secondary plan can be done. And I am going to be supportive of this because this is not sprawl. This is within the urban growth boundary. And we know absolutely that sprawl is happening, and we know that infill is better than sprawl, absolutely. But we are seeing, not everybody is going to live in an apartment building. There is still a demand for single family homes, for stacked townhouses, for other sorts of medium density development. And those needs in the city need to be filled as well. Otherwise, all we're doing is pushing the sprawl out into the county and really acting as though we've eliminated sprawl, when in fact all we've done is made it somebody else's problem to the detriment of the regional environment, not just the environment within the city itself. So I'm supportive of this application. I know that others may disagree, but I think that given all of the conditions that our staff have imposed on it, and given that this is still within the urban growth boundary, it makes sense to proceed.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Are there any other comments from committee members? Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm going to make a number of comments on this. First, I want to start by saying, like, I honestly believe that there can be differences of opinions from members of council on how to proceed on this one. And I think one of the hallmarks of our democracy is having these really respectful, important debates on issues where we have some decisions to make. But I want to start off by emphasizing that the direction the council gave was to bring forward the applications that you see before us tonight, both this one and the next one, in a manner that allowed different parties, without the city necessarily being a part of those discussions, different parties to come together to solve a problem in the ward that I represent, and that is the problem with overcrowding at the school, Sir Arthur Currie. I've talked a lot about that in the past. I'm not going to go into the details about that right now. But if you recall, the original application wanted to pitch a school on the north side of Sunningdale Road on these particular lands. And that was not ideal. In fact, it wasn't something that I supported. It wasn't something our staff supported. And having the opportunity to allow the parties to go out and see if there's another option for them, something that can be freely negotiated and not take up the time or additional cost to residents of expropriation, seemed like something worthwhile. But I always maintain that whatever came back before us has to meet our staff's full and detailed planning analysis for our consideration and the consideration of this committee. And I believe that that is what staff have done here today. Councillor Lewis makes a good point about the first time this came before us, and the staff's alternate recommendation was not to say this is going to stay a cemetery or this is going to stay open space, but to add that, to suggest that the community growth designation be added, which is really a pre-development designation and a step between, that step between the somewhere mentioning of where the lands are, where they're identified as growth, and then where they get to the process that we're at today. And so, yes, we didn't do that step. And we're not doing that step because we're trying to solve a challenge. But there were a number of concerns that staff outlined in that original application and through the process. There were concerns about servicing. There were concerns about developing and planning the community together. There were concerns about the institutional uses on the north side of the road, including the school. And concerns about ensuring that there was an environmental review designation on the lands so that we could protect any natural environmentally sensitive features. All of which I think staff have dealt with in their report today. And I think what they've done is we have a different application before us that alleviates a number of those staff concerns to the point where staff have said in the report that this application now conforms with the provincial policy statements, it conforms with the London plan, and it conforms with our 1989 official plan. And that's important because we should be judging this application based on that report and the merits that staff have assessed it on. A number of the concerns with servicing have been solved, and I know Mr. Feldberg and others can talk about what the solution is. He touched on that in his opening comments. And those are really important because a number of those questions are what drove our staff to the refusal on the application. Today, I think we have alleviated, and this application alleviates a number of those concerns, and you see what staff have written in the report before you. I want to say too, like, and this seems to be something that is confusing in the community, that this land is in the urban growth boundary. Like, it's not expanding the boundary. I've spoken with Mr. Yeoman. This is not going to have any bearing on the review of the urban growth boundary, a process that we will engage in as a council, and that will be a technical process. It will decide how much land we need in the city, and it will decide if new land comes in where it is, and there will be public consultation on that, as well as a council decision and vote. Farmland, and I think that we certainly have to support farmland, and there are places in the city where we absolutely protect farmland. The urban growth boundary, outside of the urban growth boundary exists 44% of the city. So that's 18,000 hectares or so. Of that 18,000 hectares, 12,300, or about 66% of that land, is farmland. So 29% of all the total land in the city is sitting as protected farmland outside of the urban growth boundary. I think that's important to recognize because I think we all agree that we have very fertile land here and in the county, as Councillor Lewis mentioned, surrounding the city, and it's important that we do that. Our urban growth boundary is the division line by which we protect where we will grow and where we aren't. And this particular proposal is inside of that. We also, I think through Mr. Moffat's report, recognize that we need all types of development here. We certainly need to continue to support the high density development that we see come through this committee and have supported. We have to support the infill development that we've seen, even though it's very difficult, and I'm sure Councillor Cassidy would have lots to comment on about how difficult that is given the application that just came through this council that we supported. But we also need some options for low density and medium density residential that are contemplated on this site. And how much is that really? Well, if both applications pass today, there will be some medium density displaced on the south side of Sunningdale Road. And I asked for an estimate on what is the net new development that this site would incur. Because although one of our speakers today gave the total hectarage of this lot, we know that there are roads and there are protected lands and there is green space and there is a new park and there is a stormwater management facility. And the actual estimated net new is about 150 single family homes with 40-foot frontages and 98 townhouses, if you factor in the displacement of lands to the south if a school is built there. You know, the school is pretty important to me. I represent the area. I know I'm going to feel it like other people won't. There are thousands of parents who see what their kids go through each and every day. It's really hard. It's really hard to engage and watch them. So I know the next application is pretty important to me, and I think this application stands on its own. But I also really support that there isn't going to be a school on the north side of the road where there shouldn't be with this draft plan, and there's the possibility. Strong possibility of a school on the south side. And you saw the supportive letter from the Thames Valley District School Board for this application and the next. It appears to me that they are very confident that this will move forward in a positive way that will lead to them to have a school years sooner without the additional cost of expropriation. And I got to tell you, the families, the 1,000 students at that overcrowded school and the 2,000 families, 2,000 parents approximately that are associated with that school, like, they are in such a dire situation that any opportunity we can do to give them some hope that they will get a school sooner is huge for them. And so I honestly think that this application stands on the merits that our staff have put in the report. I know that the school is a consideration for some. It's a consideration for lots in the community. Frankly, you know, if I really wanted to, I could have had a petition of 1,000 people telling us to do this, but I didn't want to go out and do that because I think we had to set these two applications forward, have our staff diligently and properly assess them against our policies. And let's remember the direction that was given to our staff was not to go and absolutely do this, but to go address some of these concerns that they have, and then ensure that any applications that come forward are assessed under the provincial policy statements, the London Plan, the official plan, and our policies and procedures. So that's what's done. And based on the reading of the report before us, I can be supportive of what staff has put before us, and will be supporting the application today and at council. I know not everybody will like that, and I know not everybody is going to do that, but I think we can have a respectful and common sense and thoughtful debate on these challenging matters of school overcrowding and housing and development at this council. And I think we've always done that. And I will completely respect and listen to what my colleagues have to say about this application, but those are my comments today. And thank you, Chair, for letting me speak.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Morgan. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I may have to leave a little bit early. My apologies if I do, but thank you for recognizing me. First off, I'd like to recognize what the Deputy Mayor said. I think the discussions are certainly going to be ones of interpretation, and I think everybody is trying to do what they think is appropriate. However, at the root of this, I really see this as a very political move, and my concerns that I've stated before still hold today. In fact, they've only grown with those concerns to where we are now. If I might just really quickly through you, Madam Chair, Deputy Mayor Morgan made a comment that about how our urban growth boundary is calculated and our land needs forecasts. How do we, through you, Madam Chair, to staff, how do we calculate how much residential space we need versus what we have? So what is counted in the current inventory? Does it include open space, or does it include those lands designated as residential?
If I can go to staff.
Thank you. To the chair, it's Greg Barrett speaking. The current calculations are based on lands that have been identified for development, so it would not include green space lands. So in this instance, and that was noted in the previous reports, that these lands having been identified as green space had not been included in any calculations, either for servicing matters or for land needs matters as it related to future development.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. I appreciate that. So here's my concerns. I heard a lot of very specious arguments tonight. One of them is talking about how that this isn't sprawl, that this is already within the urban growth boundary. This parcel is an irregular parcel that was included in the urban growth boundary as a cemetery/open space. It was not contemplated for development. You see how irregular it is because the urban growth boundary cuts across from east to west across the north, and then suddenly juts northward to include this area. And you can read in the staff report about how it came to be included within the UGB. It's not contemplated for growth. So there is a process for including these things, and that is our urban growth boundary space needs requirements and projections. And the appropriate time to do that would be within that. It's also, as you see, it hasn't been contemplated at all in the development charge servicing studies. The servicing, temporary servicing was going to be required for this, and it's right outside of the process. When this came up recently in terms of de-designating the land as the heritage lands, we suddenly had a couple applicants that were landowners that had lands outside of the urban growth boundary saying, well, what about us? And of course, that makes sense. It's going to lead to a bit of a me too. This really completely bypasses anything resembling an appropriate process. This was rejected multiple times by staff as premature. I still completely believe that it's inappropriate for councillors to have been involved in this type of negotiation in any way. If this had any resemblance to the policies in our official plan and was to help navigate small nuances within an application process, then the involvement of individual councillors would be appropriate. But this is such a massive departure from that, and it serves only to advantage one developer. The school board also was really out of line to ask for us to be involved in this as well. They continue to have expropriation tools at their disposal, and they still have not really adequately addressed to me, certainly to my satisfaction, why those aren't sufficient to be able to address their land's needs. They've talked about timing, But the timing of this, just in its own process, is going to take a long, long time as well. And the difference between the expropriation process and this is going to be marginal at best. We've heard a few times that that this has staff's full approval. That couldn't be further from the truth. It has the recommendation because council directed them to do so. So I really hope we stop mischaracterizing that too. We talk about the community benefit, and that's almost Machiavellian in framing it. The ends justify the means. We have a planning process that should mean something, and we're ready to throw it away because of the children. And we hear those arguments a lot. I'm not trying to trivialize that. I recognize there's overcrowding in the school. However, there are very clear lanes in terms of how we apply land use planning and how schools can access lands for development and how they can address some of those overcrowding issues. That's the responsibility of the board. There's an entire school board that has almost the same size of budget as we do to be able to address these things. So I'm very concerned about this. I think it sets a wildly inappropriate precedent. I can only see everybody else wanting to do something very similar in terms of how we do applications. It's not orderly development of lands. And you've heard from neighboring landowners as well about their concerns about the impacts on their properties. I don't see how this makes any sense. So I urge the committee, I recognize where this is probably going to go. I urge the committee to reject it. I'll certainly be voting against it.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Is there anyone else that would like to make comments to this recommendation? Councillor Helmer.
Thanks very much, and thanks for recognizing me at the committee. If I cut out, it may be because my lovely daughter turns off my computer, which is what happened a few minutes ago. And thanks for letting me rejoin. I want to say a couple of things at the outset. I do have a couple of questions, and then I'm going to make some comments about the actual proposal. First thing I want to say is, I recognize that staff have been directed to bring forward these amendments by council. And although that was quite a close vote, it was a close vote that passed council. And so you're following through in that direction. And I don't have any hard feelings about that. And I think, frankly, looking at the report, the staff have done a pretty good job with the hand that they have been dealt by council. My questions, and I just want to make sure that I'm clear about it before I start in on my comments, is about the overall number of residential units that are planned for this development. I think from looking at the vacant land inventory for the subdivision, it looks like it's something in the order of 740 units. I just want to clarify that with staff to make sure that that's in the ballpark. And if it's not, if you give me an estimate of what you think is in this, going to be in the subdivision if it's approved as it's designed.
Yeah, I'd like to go to staff.
Madam Chair, we're
Yes.
just looking into it at the moment. Just give us a moment. It may be quicker, Madam Chair, if we checked with the applicant. I think Mr. Stapleton is here and Mr. Campbell are here. They might be able to answer that much quicker than us.
Mr. Campbell or Mr.
Madam Chair, thanks for the question. I'm just reviewing our information right now. If Mr. Stapleton can get to the answer quicker, I'd certainly have him speak.
Mr. Stapleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The estimates we provided previously were about 550 units. There's a range of units for the larger block. The block 15 could be somewhere between the range of 200 and 300, depending on what form of housing you place on that. There's a range of zoning that's applied to that. So it ranges from 2 to 300. Block 14, we did a concept that showed about 98 two-story units, and the rest of the subdivision would allow for 150 to 165 roughly single family homes, depending on frontage, 150 as a 40-foot lot. So it's around that number, depending on how it finally gets lotted out. Which is about approximately somewhere around 550, 55 single or units. Thank you.
That's the total, just to confirm?
Yes, that would be the total.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad I asked because I was obviously wrong with that reading. So it's still quite a lot, 550. And so I get these are the points that I want to make. I have a couple of points about the proposal, and I want to organize them this way. One is around, what is the problem that the sort of deal to do the subdivision faster and do the school faster? What is the problem it's trying to solve? And I think the way it has been framed is it's a school capacity issue. We're trying to get more spaces for kids so that they can go to school close to where they live, which of course, I think there's a lot of agreement that that's a great idea. And the question is, how do we do that? And I would say that the proposal, obviously it's accelerating the acquisition of the school lands to the south by making this kind of contingent offer. But what it's doing is essentially replicating the exact problem that has led to the school capacity issue in the first place, which is a lot of residential subdivisions being built in this area without enough schools to keep pace. And here we have an area to the north, which is going around the normal planning process for how we would plan out in a comprehensive way, new subdivision, big area like this to be added in. It's trying to go faster at a time when we really need to slow down and let the school capacity catch up to an area that's been growing so rapidly. So imagine, if you think about it, we're talking about adding 550 new homes to an area that's already over capacity for the school children who already live in that area. Plus there's all kinds of construction that's happening already in approved subdivisions already. So we're really accelerating the residential at a time when we really just need to be accelerating the school building. Just the school building. That's the part that needs to be sped up. And so I think we're really solving the wrong problem. And in fact, we're just continuing on with the same thing that's got us into this problem in the first place. And so I don't support it for that reason. Particularly, I don't think it's really solving the problem. Expropriating this property, since the developer is not willing to sell it without this rezoning, would be something that would actually address it, because we wouldn't be adding residential. We would be adding the school faster. And it'd be allowed to, it would allow some breathing room for the community to kind of catch up. Okay. So the second reason that I really don't support the development, thanks, is a simple issue around fairness, which is we have a lot of developers and landowners who come through with applications. They want to accelerate their projects. They all want to go quickly. They all are looking to build homes of various kinds. And it's really important that in the land use process, we treat all of those applicants fairly and the same way. And there's a number of things we do around gross servicing, the planning of growth infrastructure, how we stage and implement the things that are needed to support growth. So GMIS, development charges, all of that is just being thrown aside for this particular application. We're not talking about any projects in the DC that would be supportive of this development. This is a big long-term plan, and there's nothing in there that allows for this kind of development north of Sunningdale to proceed. It wasn't included in the London plan in terms of developable lands where we'd expect residential to be developed, because it's green space in the London plan. It wasn't even appealed, that designation in the London plan that it should be green space. And as we're managing through the tremendous growth that's happening in our community, we need to make sure that we're doing that in a fair way, that's treating all the various landowners and all the various people who want to build housing the same. And that's a really important principle that we really need to stick to that. And a lot of this, keying on the school, we accelerate it because it also solves this other problem. We don't do that for other people. And we shouldn't do that for anybody. We should treat everybody the same and put them through the same process. You want to build residential subdivision that requires growth infrastructure, you're going through GMIS. We're going to plan all the development charges, all the projects need to be done. We're going to figure out what the rates are. Everyone's going to pay the same rates. Fair, transparent, open. You want to adjust the urban growth boundary, bring new lands in, we'll have a fair, open process where people can make their submissions and we can evaluate all the various lands. The particular development, I think actually, what's actually proposed is better than what I thought we might have. Thank you. We have a lot of good medium density residential, and I want to commend the applicant, just by the fact that I don't like the overall proposal or how it's being done. I do like that there's some higher density housing, slightly higher density housing included in the proposal. I think that's an improvement over some of what we've seen. But this really needs to be refused. That's why staff refused the initial application to say, we want to go immediately to zoning for residential. And instead said, here's a compromise where we will instead put it as future community growth. That will allow us to do a comprehensive plan for the whole area, figure out the servicing, plan it out, do it in an appropriate, fair, and transparent way that treats everybody the same. That was the compromise. And I guess, you know, I previously in council meetings, Deputy Mayor Morgan has said, I've never met a compromise I didn't like. Well, I guess we actually found an example of one that he doesn't like, because the compromise was the staff recommendation a long time ago, which was refuse the initial application, but allow it move to community growth. And that wasn't acceptable, not good enough, had to push on as fast as possible, accelerate the residential development even faster than what's already been going on in the area. And if we keep this up, we're gonna need like 2, 3, 4 schools in this area, not this one that's being maybe slightly accelerated. You can hear from the way that other people who've waited on the application are talking, they don't feel like they're being treated fairly. The likelihood that this is going to get appealed is very high, right? Because people will look at it and say, this isn't right. And then if it's appealed, the whole thing is gummed up. How long is that going to take to work its way through? Maybe it will be supported at the Ontario Land Tribunal, maybe it won't. If it's not, where's that going to leave the school board? Right? They should just get on with expropriating the lands that they need for the school. That's the area where there's lots of agreement. That's the area where there's no disagreement. Yes, you need land for a school. Go get it. This actual designation of the lands here to change from open space, agricultural lands, prime agricultural lands that we need. We need those in Ontario, in London. We need to be protecting the prime agricultural lands, not speeding up the destruction of agricultural lands as fast as we possibly can. So I hope you'll reject it. I'm not very optimistic that it's going to be rejected. But I hope that by the time we get to council, that's actually the decision that council makes.
Thank you, Councillor Helmer. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. We've got a problem here. The school board has a problem, but we are two separate entities, but we're the same city with parents and families, both part of the Thames Valley District School Board, but also Londoners. We received a letter from the Thames Valley District School Board, and I'd like to just read a couple of excerpts from it. This will provide the fastest path forward for a much-needed elementary school and licensed childcare center in this part of our community. It goes further on. This is the most expeditious path forward for this new school and childcare center in the service to the children and families of our community. I'm sure they consider expropriation, but in their opinion, this is the fastest way forward. And time is of the essence here. We have a school, Sir Arthur Currie, designed for 530 pupils that have over 1,000 students there, resulting in 22 portables. This is not a tenable situation. If we don't go down this path, the school population will be served by 22 portables going forward for many years. My feeling from city staff, the biggest problem they initially had, is they would prefer a secondary plan for development of north of Sunningdale in this area, as there are more lands within our urban growth boundary. Yeah, I think I would prefer a more cohesive plan amongst neighborhoods. However, as we've seen with this report, this is a well thought out small subdivision that can be hooked up to future plans when we get to that point where a secondary plan is developed with this as part of it. Now, this comes at no extra cost to the city. All temporary infrastructure is being picked up by the developer. I don't see this as an urban growth boundary question. That question will be coming to council in the years ahead as London is reaching the maximums of the current urban growth boundaries. This land is part of the urban growth boundary. What this does is provide, at the end of the day, a solution to a situation that needs to be solved on behalf of the parents and their children in this part of the city. I don't believe it sets an open door for future development, as this is a very unique situation. And I think this is a role of council. The role of council is to understand planning practices and procedures, work with staff, but there are exceptions. And if I think this is an example of one of those exceptions. We need to find a solution here. And to me, this is a reasonable solution that serves all parties. So I will be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Lehman. Are there any other comments from the committee or visiting councillors? Councillor Cassidy, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for recognizing me. Wasn't sure if I was going to weigh in. I'm not a member of the committee, so I won't have a vote tonight, but I will have a vote at council. As Councillor Helmer pointed out, what brought us here tonight was a very close vote of council. It was something like 7-6. So this has never been something that's been fully supported, this direction, where we are today, what's before us today. It was not the direction that staff asked to take. We asked staff to take this direction. We've received a lot of information over the year and months that we've been considering this. Some of the information that we did receive was the fact that if this school gets built on the quickest timeline possible, by the time it's built, both Arthur Curry School and this new school will be already beyond capacity, because that is the growth pattern, as Councillor Helmer pointed out, in this area. And then these new residential units being proposed is like throwing gasoline on the fire. So building this school is not going to solve the problem. Adding these residential units in this area at this time is going to make the problem worse. And this new school will not solve the current problem. It will already be beyond capacity. When we talk about sprawl and we talk about the residential building that's going on in the county, it's not even comparing the same species of fruit. It might even be comparing apples to vegetables. When you look at an 80% growth in single family home development in the county, it's 80% of what is currently there. To compare that to the kind of residential development that exists already in London is disingenuous. London is 2/3 the size geographically of Toronto and only 10% of the population. We are not at the place where we need to build on open space and agricultural land, because that is what's coming down the road. When we allow our policies to be upended, when we allow these back way kind of approaches to getting development approved, it just leads to more of this same kind of thing. And this is exactly what urban sprawl is. Even if we make the developer build all of the infrastructure and all of the utilities and all of the connections that would normally take place through development charges and thoughtful, methodical urban development, even if we the developer takes all of this on, at some point, these will be city roads. At some point, this will be city infrastructure. And that is what adds to the cost for all of the taxpayers of London. This kind of outward growth means we need more snow plows on the road. It means we will need more libraries and community centers to service these outlying areas instead of taking advantage of the services and infrastructure that already exists within the built up area of London. That doesn't mean that this area will never be developed. It means, and based on staff's wanting to go slow with this, it means we're not ready for this kind of development in this area at this time. So I won't be supporting this when this comes to council. And again, I see where the committee is going on this, and we will see, since the last vote was very close, 7-6, it will be interesting to see how this lands at council.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Are there any other comments from committee members or visiting councillors? I see none. Oh, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to make a brief comment, and we can discuss, whether it's adequate, whether it's fully meeting the needs or not. But let's be clear that when new properties are built and become occupied, the city benefits then from assessment growth, which helps pay for those snow plows plowing more roads, for police patrolling more roads, etc. In fact, we just approved new hires for the police in the assessment growth that we approved, allocations that we approved last month. I do hear where Councillor Cassidy was going with the concern about the increasing costs, absolutely. But let's not make it out that the existing London taxpayer is going to be paying for all of that. There will be revenue coming in through assessment growth as well. So I'm just going to end my comments there. But I think it's important to state that those expanded services are funded at least partially through assessment growth.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Any other comments? Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yeah, I just want to clarify one question. It came up through the discussion. Mr. Stapleton answered that there would be approximately, with some of the caveats that he mentioned, 550 units on the site. I wonder if I could ask Mr. Stapleton, knowing that there's another application before us, if a school was built on the south side, it would displace some residential development there. So does he have an estimate of what the net new units would be? Not the total units on this particular parcel of land, but if both of those applications went through and a school was built, what would be the net new addition of units in the city?
Mr. Stapleton?
It would be, yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, it would be less 200 units, roughly 200 units, 225 units difference. So it would be 550 less 225. The block 15, the large block on the Mount Pleasant property, and the school site on the Kent subdivision are zoned for the density of 75 units per hectare. There's some inefficiencies on block 15 due to the housing that is within the property. So they yield approximately the same. Mount Pleasant being about 300 units to the max, and the school site would be about 225 because it's slightly smaller. It's only 8 acres. Hope I answered that question.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments from committee? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify the new proposed development. It's got 13 residential blocks, low density residential blocks, some medium density blocks. How many school blocks are there in the new subdivision?
I assume you're asking me, Councillor
Or
Helmer?
Mr. Stapleton, Mr. Campbell as well.
Okay.
Sorry, I actually
Sorry, go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
Hold on, maybe staff can answer your question, Mr. or Councillor Helmy.
I'm sure they can.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair. So there are no school blocks planned on the new Mount Pleasant subdivision. And there's just the one in the Kent subdivision being planned at this point.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? I see none. I would like to be able to speak from the chair if the committee will allow me to make my comments. And I want to start off by thanking the public for coming out. I know we heard from you the number of concerns that still remain in the community. I would encourage the community to still be part of this process, whatever that looks like, to continue working with staff to make sure that you're part of the process. I can't imagine, 2 years ago, the community had no idea of this subdivision going forward. And it is, I would think, quite a surprise. I have a ward that is full of development and infills. And one of the challenges I have is addressing the neighborhood concerns and how we balance growth. That needs to all be taken into account, and I really do rely on our policies to help me decide how we can move forward. I feel this process, this recommendation that has come before us, as being sort of a surprise to me as well. And I'd like to first of all start off with thanking staff. A lot of work. We had 2 planners on this recommendation. A lot of work went into this. There's numerous holding provisions. I'm not the professional here. I just hope we've got them all in here. I haven't gone through them and pulled them out. I would hope that within the subdivision agreement, we would hold some lands for future school use, given the challenges that Deputy Morgan spoke to with the need for schooling. And I feel very responsible for, when this came to council, and council approved this to go forward. I did not support it at the time, but I did support it further back in the process on looking at schools in the area. And I did that because I understand Deputy Morgan's concerns when it comes to schooling. Ward 9 has the same challenges. I get it. We build a school and we need a school right after that school is built. And, I applaud him for his advocacy on dealing with the needs. And we always seem to build, but our social infrastructure is just lagging behind constantly. And I don't know how we can move that up, but I do feel that I was part of the problem, or not a problem, but I was part of the direction that more or less set this recommendation coming to us tonight, because I did support that we look at schools. I want to go back to the challenges of neighborhoods and how we do the infills and the importance of policies. And I rely on them. I rely on the London plan, that building in and up. I rely on our development charges, how we determine our development charges. I have applications in my ward, they want development to happen, infill, but it's not in the DC formula. It's not in our swap plan. And somehow we've just made this happen. I hear the challenges and concerns. To me, the process was not transparent for me as a councillor, as a member of this committee. I really do have concerns how we made this happen. I do think I will not be supporting it. This sets a dangerous precedent. Like I said, I have a ward, it's full of development. How we swap lands now to develop in areas where we have not done sufficient studies is a huge concern for me. So with that, I'll sort of end my comments. There's numerous questions that are left unanswered here. We heard from the community, and I know this will be a debate at council. It will be a close debate. I want to thank staff and the public for their input, and we'll see what happens at council. Thank you. And I'm looking for a motion, or I think we've got a motion on the floor. If we can proceed to vote, thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-1.
Next up is the public participation meeting 3.5 to review the, sorry, I'm just trying to catch up on myself here. There is an application from the Thames Valley District School Board for 1284 Sunningdale Road West. I'd like to open up the public participation meeting. Looking for a mover, seconder. Mover, Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Hillier.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And I just want to remind committee members, we did have some revisions for 3.4 that we just approved, and as well as this application 3.5 to revisions and amendments in our bylaws. So I just want to bring that to everyone's attention. I would like to go to city staff for a quick verbal.
Good evening, through you, Chair Hopkins. This is Allison Curtis again on behalf of Planning and Development for item 3.5, which is found on page 393 of the agenda package. I'd just like to note before we get started that the map in the zoning amendment schedule only shows the NF zone, the neighborhood facility zone, be applied. It is the NF1 zone. The amendment schedule has been updated and provided to clerks. So this application is for a zoning bylaw amendment at 1284 Sunningdale Road West. The subject lands are located in the northwest quadrant of the city at the intersection of Sunningdale Road West and Fair Oaks Boulevard, and are included in the Fox Hollow Community Plan. The site is approximately 3.27 hectares in size and is currently vacant but zoned for residential uses. The lands are described as block 169 of phase 5 of the Kent subdivision, which is not yet registered. Future residential uses surround the lands to the east, south, and west, while there are agricultural land uses to the north. This request is the result of council direction on May 25th, 2021 and October 5th, 2021 for staff to assist the Thames Valley District School Board in the process of finding and rezoning lands to accommodate a new elementary school in the Northwest. The existing school site that services this area, which is Sir Arthur Currie, is currently operating above capacity. The requested amendment is to change the zoning from a holding residential R4, R6, R7, and R8 special provision zone to include the neighborhood facility NF1 zone in order to facilitate the development of a two-story elementary school and daycare center. This block is of a sufficient size and location to accommodate the proposed development, and it would integrate into the surrounding neighborhood context. This rezoning is considered appropriate and compatible with the existing and future land uses. The staff are satisfied that the proposal represents good planning and recommend the bylaw be introduced at municipal council meeting to be held on May 3rd, 2022. Staff are available to address any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to now go to the applicant.
Thank you. And through the chair, it is Jeff Vogt. I'm the superintendent of facilities, capital and planning with Thames Valley School Board. And I'm joined this evening by our manager of capital projects, Carlos Enriquez, our manager of planning, Ben Pusnov, and one of our planning team members, Eric Miles. And we're here and happy to answer any questions that may arise from the committee.
Thank you. And I'd like to now go to any technical questions. Councillor Helmer.
The parcel that's being suggested for rezoning is a medium density parcel. Were any low density parcels considered?
Through you, Madam Chair, is the question from Councillor Helmer directed to staff or to the school board?
If I can go to staff.
I think it's probably better for the school board since they're the applicant.
Thank you for the question, and through the chair, and maybe Manager Ben Pusnov might want to add on to this, but essentially within the area that the Ministry of Education approved us for the build of a new school site, this was the only site that was available to us in any way, shape, or form. I don't know if Manager Pusnov has anything further to add.
Nothing further. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other technical questions? If I could now go to the public, if there's anyone here from the public that would like to speak to the recommendation of changing the zoning to a neighborhood facility. I'd like to ask one more time, if there's anyone from the public that would like to make comments to this recommendation, please come forward. And I'll ask one more time. If you'd like to speak to this recommendation, please come forward. I see none. I'd like to go to the committee to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Lewis.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And if I could go to the committee members for motions, comments. Sorry, Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yes, I just want to say I'm very supportive of this. I think this is this side of Sunningdale is the appropriate spot for a school, given our staff's earlier comments on other applications previously. And I think between this, the new potential Catholic school in the same neighborhood, you know, this is going to add needed school spaces in a neighborhood that is facing significant overcrowding at the current schools. I also would say, not to be discounted, but given the recent, you know, signing of the childcare agreement, having 100 new licensed childcare spaces is certainly an added benefit to this potential. So I know this is just the rezoning, but I look forward to seeing this all approved and us getting a new school and new childcare spaces as soon as possible.
Any other comments, motions? Councillor Helmer.
Just briefly, I think this really illustrates how badly out of whack our planning is for school sites. You know, even you look at what the parcel in front of us actually is. This is basically as far away as you could get from the existing residential neighborhood. It's right up against a major road. It's as far to the north as you could get from everybody who lives south of there already. We're taking a multi-family medium density designation and downzoning it to a school. So instead of being 75 units per hectare residential, we're replacing it with a school. And you could imagine in a well-designed neighborhood, the school would be kind of in the middle and everybody could get to it from all directions and it would be easy to walk there. And putting it on a major arterial like this, I just shows how far we've fallen in terms of like being able to find good sites for schools. This is not a good site. Like this is like, as the school board just described, it's like, this is the only one available. We can't get anything else. And that is a huge problem. You know, we had this information report that came forward to Community Protective Services about working together with the schools, school board and the city doing this planning. And, you know, I was asking about opportunities. How would we improve? How are we going to do this better? But it's a very bad thing that we're at this point where, you know, we're going to approve something that's on the edge of the existing built area. We just did it in Cedar Hollow a couple of years ago, right up against the urban growth boundary, as far to the east and north as you could imagine. New school site. This one right up against the major arterial, which is a rural, right now it's a rural cross section. Boom, that's where the new school is going to go. I'm glad to see that it's going to be integrated childcare. It's great that it's 2-story instead of being 1-story. I think there's lots of good things about the proposal, and getting a school up in here is definitely needed. So I'm gonna have to think about whether I support the actual rezoning for the school. You know, on the one hand, it's like so desperately needed, but this is not a good spot, really, even within the existing neighborhood to locate a school. You'd want to see it more at the interior of the neighborhood, and you know, because it's been so built out already, those options are very difficult. And I understand the bind the school board is in, and it's not really the school board's fault, I don't think. I mean, setting aside that they're not willing to expropriate, apparently. The province's fault. Like the money has to come much earlier to be able to acquire these sites and build the schools, much earlier in the process. I see Councillor Hillier, you know, on the screen. I'm thinking about the amount of time that people in Summerside had to wait for a school. You know, they had a school site ready to go, just wait. And, you know, that's not working. That's not a process that's working well. And, you know, I don't want to take it out on the school board, all my frustrations with the overall process, or frankly, the developer who's insisting on the previous issue in order to give the land, sell the land, I should say, to make this even possible. But I do think it's a sign of a process that's really not working well, especially in the high growth areas and areas that are, you know, relatively newly constructed. I'm not even getting into the disinvestment and abandoning of the core areas where we've got schools being closed, and then in a very ironic and disturbing turn of events, expanding the yard at the other school and knocking over a bunch of houses in order to do it. Existing houses that were already there being demolished to make way for a bigger schoolyard. So I think there's a lot of process improvements that could be made. I think the province has got to lead by doing the capital financing much, much better, so the school boards know what they can work with and actually have the opportunities in front of them when they're presented. But we need to make sure that we're providing appropriate school sites for all these neighborhoods. You know, I will give credit to all the councillors in the suburban areas. Like, they've been trying, you know, to make this process better, improve it all the way along. And I think this is a really good example of how bad things are, that we're sort of settling for a school site like this, which would be so far away from the people who are further to the south. And then this is probably one of many schools that will be needed in this area.
Any other comments? So if the committee will allow me just to make a comment here, and I do really think we are settling here, and I didn't support this direction, and I'm going to be consistent. That's not to say that I can change my mind before council when it comes to approving this site, but I have grave concerns on the process that we've undertaken to get to this point. I appreciate that we've got some daycare centers, but our infrastructure when it comes to schools is lagging so far behind as we build. And I do think that this is the beginning of more conversations to come. And I have concerns. It feels like the middle of our city is empty now. We've got that heavy weight around the areas, the outside areas, the suburban areas. And the need for housing is there, but how we build these schools, I'm glad to know that there are members from the Thames Valley District School Board here. I think we do need to have more communication. I appreciate their letter and their comments and how we can have more engagement and not be reacting, but having planning. This is the Planning and Environment Committee, and it just seems that we are reacting more than we're planning when it comes to this application. So for now, I won't be supporting it. And with that, there is a motion. I know, I'm just waiting for committee members to move it along. So we do have I know. Thank you, Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Lehman. With that, we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-1.
Members, I know it's been a long evening. We've got a few more items. If we can proceed, just want to get some nods. So moving on to items for direction, 4.1 is the Urban Agricultural Strategy 2021 Annual Report. There is a request for delegation status as well. So I know we are going to be asking to receive and approve the report. And do we go with that first and then go with the delegation request? I just want to ask staff the process here, or can it be done at once?
Can you please approve approve or deny the delegation request before you approve the staff report, please?
Okay, so I'll go to committee members, and I understand that there is Laura Thorne from the Urban Roots of London doing the delegation request, and she is here. I just want to confirm. Yes, she is. Councillor Lewis and Councillor Lehman, so we are approving the delegation request.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
I'd like to, first of all, go to Laura Thorne. If you are here, if you can hear me.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, and I just want to remind you that you have up to 5 minutes, so welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the Planning and Environment Committee for this opportunity to speak. My name is Laura Thorne, and I'm the Director of Organizational Development. I'm speaking on behalf of Urban Roots London, a member of the Urban Agricultural Steering Committee. We have asked through the Steering Committee for the Planning and Environmental Committee to consider our request to ask Council to direct City staff to provide a report to the Planning and Environmental Committee about the use of city land for urban agriculture. In March 2022, City Council approved a licensing agreement for the creation of a food hub in Cavendish Park. This project is an exciting step in bringing the urban agricultural strategy forward, and we applaud the efforts of everyone involved. However, it is unclear how and why this project and the involved organizations were able to access this opportunity when others in the city have been denied the same opportunities. In the past, as recently as fall of 2021, when organizations, including those led by underserved and underrepresented populations, have approached the city to grow food for consumption on city-owned lands, such as parks, they have been told that the city doesn't license land for urban agriculture, or that there isn't a process in place at this time that would allow them to do so. It is critical that the City of London ensures a fair and equitable process is used when determining who can access city-owned land for food production. And so that other organizations and community groups have a clear understanding of that process. So we are asking that you consider our request to direct city staff to develop a report that includes a clear process to apply to use city-owned land for urban agriculture, an inventory of available land and a process to work with city staff to inquire about said land, a standard licensing agreement and a standard rate and length for a licensing agreement, a transparent and equitable approach to determine who can enter into agreements, standards for expected outcomes and uses of the city land to ensure productivity and impact, and ways to ensure costs of this process is low to reduce financial barriers for organizations trying to grow food for their communities. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have about this request.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. I would like to now go to the committee for comments. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll start by saying to our guest, I've volunteered a couple of times out at the Urban Roots Farm, and I've purchased some produce as well as joining you for the annual dinners. I appreciate the work you're doing. It's a great organization, and it's really rewarding the way that the community is involved in it, in my view. So thank you for that. You did mention, and I'm generally supportive of the ask you're making to prepare, a report on how we could proceed with using some city lands for this purpose. One of the things that you mentioned, though, was a standardized lease and cost agreements, usage agreements, outcomes. But you also mentioned the rather diverse groups and underserviced groups that might be looking for opportunities. Do you feel that a standardized approach is best, or do you see that only as a template that would be altered along the way, depending on the approach? Because I think we may have some very active groups, we may have some much smaller groups. So I'm just trying to get your thoughts on whether a standardized approach is best, or whether it would be better to have something that staff work on a case-by-case basis.
Ms. Thorne?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think that you bring up a really excellent point about ensuring that it's an equitable process and understanding that everyone's needs will be different. I think having a minimum, maybe instead of standard, would be a better way to put it, or a range, just to give people an idea of what's actually possible, if that answers your question.
That does it, and thank you very much. That's helpful for me to consider going forward.
Thank you. Any other comments from the committee? So there is a request here for a motion to get a report back, and not sure if I can do that from this chair. I don't think I can. So committee members, thank you. Councillor Lewis.
I'm happy to support this, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to move a motion that requests Civic Administration prepare and return a report to PEC that would provide us some options on a process that would allow the use of city-owned land for urban agriculture. If the clerk is able to, I know it was in the letter that we received in our package, but if we can include the, including but not limited to, an inventory of available land, a transparent and equitable approach to determining who can enter into agreements as standard expected outcomes, and perhaps a minimum licensing agreement and rates, knowing that staff may have a variety of pieces of input to provide to us, and we may actually get something back that says here are 10 or 12 different options even, but if staff could include in their report those bullet points that were outlined in our communication, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. So you're agreeable with the bullet points that were provided and hopefully giving staff direction on looking at other possibilities as well. So thank you for that. And we do have a seconder in Councillor Hillier. And I'm not sure if we've given enough time for the clerk to get everything done. Any other comments? Councillor Lewis.
Well, I'm just going to add, I really appreciate this being brought forward, both by the Urban Agricultural Steering Committee and by Urban Roots tonight, because I think that there is some land, some city-owned land within our municipal boundaries that would provide a real opportunity. And I think when people are connected to how their food is grown and produced, it actually is a benefit to society as a whole. I think we often get disconnected from that. And so, you know, I've often heard from constituents, why don't we plant more fruiting trees in our parks, and then people can just help themselves to that, you know, apple or whatever it happens to be. And I realize that there are some challenges around just having that everywhere. And, you know, those range from pest control to suitability of the soil to other uses that are happening in the parks. But I don't think that that's consistent with all of our land. I think there's some opportunities for that. And so I do, and I know staff will have to put a fair amount of work into this. I know it's not something that they'll turn around and bring back to us in a cycle or two. But I hope that it's given some thought, and I look forward to hearing also when it comes back to us, the community's feedback on how this might be refined to move forward.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Lewis. And if the committee will allow me just to make a brief comment, I'm very supportive of getting a report back. If the pandemic has taught us anything, is the importance of urban agriculture. I want to thank staff for the annual report. If you look at it, there's a lot of things that are going on in our community, and it is the pandemic has taught us that we need to be sustainable and rely on our own sources of food and food as much as possible. So looking forward to this report back. And I want to thank the community for their advocacy and keeping the conversation in front of us as well. So with that, can we proceed to vote?
Sorry, Madam Chair, if I may.
Mr. Barrett, sorry, I didn't recognize your hand.
Thank you. Sorry, Madam Chair. All I wanted to ask would be in your recommendation that it not be specific that we come back to PEC. A lot of these lands actually would be covered under the Parks and Rec bylaw. And so wanting to be able to follow up and follow through on the direction and the request that's come through, the final report might not end up coming back to PEC. And right now your motion says to come back here. So if it could be just directed to staff to be reported back, that might be a little bit clearer.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett, for your comments, and Councillor Lewis, I'll go to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I appreciate Mr. Barrett raising that, because as I was reading what the clerk had up, I thought Ms. Smith in Neighborhood Children and Fire Services might have a fair amount of work to do in this, and I recognize that the parks folks may as well. So I wonder if we might just change it to say requested to report back at a future meeting of the appropriate standing committee.
Thank you for those changes, Councillor Lewis. Don't know if I need to read it for the public. Can the public see the motion?
They won't be able to read it.
Okay. Once I see it, I'll just read it.
Oh, it should be.
I can't see.
You should be able to see it, Ms.
I'm just waiting for it to come up.
Sorry, it's number 3.
I am having difficulty reading it. Yes, please.
The motion is that the Civic Administration be requested to report back at a future meeting of the appropriate standing committee, including but not limited to the Civic Administration apply to use city-owned land for urban agriculture, an inventory of available land, and a process to work with Civic Administration to inquire, a standard licensing agreement, and a standard rate for a licensing agreement, a transparent and equitable approach to determine who can enter into agreements, standards for expected outcomes and uses of the city land to ensure productivity and impact, and ensure cost of this process is low.
And with that, we've got a motion.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Committee, and moving on to 4.2, this is Mayor Holder's UNESCO designation. London is Canada's City of Music. Just wondering if I could go to committee members, or maybe I should go to staff just for any concerns with the suggested motion that's before us.
Through the chair, thank you very much. The resolution is clear, and so we don't have any concerns with the notice, the recommendation as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Mathers. And with that, I'll go to committee. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, I had an enjoyable afternoon down at the Richmond Tavern with some friends listening to a great London local band, Newport Electric. They play around the city. I strongly suggest you check them out. They're fantastic. It was the first time I was out listening to live music in about 2 years because of COVID. And I was in a very reflective mood, maybe because of the music, maybe because the environment was full house and the place was rocking, and it was a very happy time. And I thought, here I am down in downtown London listening to live music. And I thought, maybe because I'm a counselor, that I thought on the UNESCO's recent designation of London being Canada's City of Music. We've had some great music venues, in my time that are not here. Fry Fogel's, Call the Office, London Music Club, and then even go back as far as Wonderland Gardens with Guy Lombardo. We have now some fantastic places, Budweiser Gardens, Aeolian Hall, the London Music Hall, the Grand Theatre, and Richmond Tavern, and such others. We've had challenges with our core, as we all know. We I think, addressed those wholeheartedly when we first came to this term, and initiatives such as the Coordinated Informed Response and CORE initiatives really kind of got put on their heels when COVID hit. But now that we're coming out, I'm confident that they will be a tool to get our core where we want it. Add to that the amount of residential development that's going on downtown. Fantastic from a point of view of reinvigorating the core. If you look at strong city cores in North America, a lot of them are built around entertainment. I think we have an opportunity here to leverage this recent UNESCO designation to get kind of a city direction to re-energize Dundas Street and the surrounding areas with kind of a City Hall vision of what could be. So these are the things that, I was thinking of. And then when I saw the mayor's letter and suggestion, I thought how timely. I think I would appreciate hearing from staff on what an entertainment district would look like and what that means. What are the boundaries? What are the positives, concerns, et cetera? But I think we have an opportunity here to really get some momentum, to bring back our core. So that's why I am supportive of the mayor's initiatives mentioned in his letter, and I would like to motion that be put on the floor, please.
Just looking for a seconder in Councillor Lewis. Councillor Lewis, oh, sorry. I assume you're seconding.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and yes, I'll second, and I'll just offer a really brief comments as well. I'm not vintage enough, unlike Councillor Lehman, I guess, to remember Wonderland Gardens and Guy Lombardo, but nonetheless, I think that when I see this, I think about the future, and I think about the successful downtown cores in major cities, both in North America and around the world. Entertainment is what really drives those to be successful. The era of the downtown core being the retail hub, and while retail, niche retail in particular, will continue to play an important role, but sort of the era of the big department store chain retailers being in the core is gone. And so for the cores to reinvent themselves as entertainment districts, as places where people come to enjoy a meal, to enjoy music, to enjoy theater, those are the future of our downtown cores. And so I support where the mayor is going with this request to us, and I'm happy to second the motion and look forward to seeing what staff bring back in terms of what an entertainment district for London might look like.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yes, and this is one of the reasons I came tonight to the meeting on behalf of Mayor Holder. This is something that the mayor mentioned in his State of the City speech, and this really builds on the UNESCO designation as Canada's first and only so far city of music, and also our opportunity to build momentum with the community. This is the idea of London as a music city can be embraced not just by the municipal government, but by organizations and individuals across the city. And one of the things I'll point to is next week, the London Chamber of Commerce has Creative Industries Summit at the Grand Theatre, where we will hear from individuals about music and its importance to the city, how this supports a vibrant economy, and what can be done to support it. So I think that this is certainly one of the roles that municipal government can take, is getting a report back on seeing what our role is in the creation of an entertainment district. And it's probably the first of many moves that we can make to support our designation as a city of music. So I know Mayor Holder would have loved to be here to pitch this himself, but I'm hopeful the committee will be supportive and vote for this tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other comments? You see none. I would like to make a comment from the chair, if the committee will allow me. And Councillor Lewis, I do remember Wonderland Gardens. I'm a little bit older than Councillor Lehman. I am generally supportive of the direction here. The core area entertainment, I assume, just will take place in the core area of our city. But I think it's also important to know that we have many areas throughout the city that celebrate music. Springbank Park. There's other areas throughout our city that has these festivals that are also important and shouldn't be denied the opportunities to celebrate music. We know that music is fundamental to our health and well-being. So I am generally supportive of this moving forward, even though it just addresses the core area entertainment district and what that looks like. But I just wanted to make those comments. The importance of having opportunities throughout our city to celebrate music is also important. So thank you. And with that, we do have a motion. If we can proceed to vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
5, deferred matters, additional business. I see none. And I'm looking at committee to adjourn. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Could we do a hand vote? All those in favor?
Thank you. The motion carries 4-0.
Thanks, everyone.